Uhuru! Come on, some energy, Uhuru! Ease where they to! Ease where they to! Africa! Uhuru! Comrades, brothers, sisters, friends, and allies. My name is Ikinge Maele, and I'm a member of the staff of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. On behalf of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Office of the Chair, I say Akwaba, which means welcome in Swahili. Akwaba. I want to salute our Chairman Omali Yeshitela, Deputy Chair Ona Zane Yeshitela, and the entire National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party, USA. Uhuru. Welcome to the first plenary of the 7th Congress of our great African People's Socialist Party. Our historic plenary themed Vanguard Up, the unity of theory and practice will usher in a new period of struggle that will propel our movement and the world to a glorious free future. As you know, our Constitution mandates that we hold a Congress every 5 years, and it is our practice to hold a plenary every year. This plenary, in many ways, is a mini Congress, and we have a tremendous amount of work to get done over the next 3 days. So we are calling on you and all members of the party to make this plenary and our quest for unification and liberation of Africa and African people globally a reality. This plenary and the report presented by our chairman will provide us with the leadership and direction necessary to see us to victory. I want to remind everyone that with the crisis of imperialism ever present and growing, we must always be security conscious. Everyone is wanted for the protection and safety of all our leaders and our supporters. As the Vanguard Party, we know that we will be the first ones to come under attack, so we must be prepared. We are asking everyone to turn off their phones or put them in silent mode. There is no photography or videoing without express permission from Burning Spear Media. And if you have any questions, you should see Comrade Akile Anai, who is the Director of the Department of Agitation and Propaganda. We also ask that you refrain from social media throughout this process and ask that you do not go live during this process. Again, comrades, brothers, sisters, friends, and allies, I say Akwaba, welcome. Uhuru! 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 Ease where they to! Africa! Vanguard up! Vanguard up! Uhuru! Now, comrades, I bring forward Comrade Kundai Bajikiaki, who will move us forward. Uhuru.
Uhuru! All right, I really want to appreciate Kinge and the NCC and the team that helped put this plenary together. And so, if everyone could join me in welcoming the National Central Committee of our party, the Vanguard, the advanced attachment of the African working class. First, we have the Southern Regional Representative, Kobina Banshitengo. Africa. Ease where they to. Next, we have the Western Regional Representative, Bakari Olatunji. Next is the Midwestern Regional Representative, Malika Alexander. Africa. Israel too. The Northern Regional Representative, Nana Ya Grant. Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, Bahamas, Alex Morali. President of the African National Women's Organization, Yejide Orumeli. Next, we have my leadership, Director of the All African People's Development and Empowerment Project, Dr. Aisha Fields. And President of the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, Kalambai Andanette. The lovely Director of Agitation and Propaganda, Akile Anai. Deputy Chair of our party, Ona Zane Yeshatella. Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Luwezi Kinshasa. And now if everyone could please stand as we bring in a man who, after the defeat of the Black Liberation Movement, never lost his determination to be free and liberate his people. Chairman Omali Yeshatella. I welcome you again to the first plenary of the African People's Socialist Party 7th Congress, Vanguard Up, the Unity of Theory and Practice. I want to welcome the administrative assistant for the office of the chairman and a very talented musician, our comrade, Alikia Ngoma, to lead us in the African and national fight song, Uhuru.
Uhuru. I do just want to explain a few things about this song before we begin. It is an original piece of the African People's Socialist Party, and it is titled the African Nation Fight Song. And this was actually written with the approval of Chairman Omali Yeshatella and Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa. And I just wanted to go through just a few of the lyrics before we begin and sing this together. If we go to verse 1 very quickly, please. Okay, just to translate a few things, just for those who may not know, we start with Izwele tu I Africa, which is Zulu for my homeland is Africa. It's like how we just kept saying Izwele tu I Africa. And then we have Shout Uhuru, which is Kiswahili for freedom. If you go to verse 3, we have, this is pronounced Vive Haiti. Yes, Haiti is the original name of what people refer to as Haiti, and it's also the original name of the island itself. Vive Haiti means long live Haiti. And then what's written in red, it's pronounced coupe tête, which means cut heads, and then boule kai, which means burn houses. And, and this is a slogan that was developed and popularized by Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was the one who carried out the African Revolution of Haiti. So this was the quote, you know, coupe tête boule kai. And verse 4, just wanted to make this clear when it says from Harlem to Brazil to Azania. In the song we say Azania, but it's Azania. And this is the original name or the true name of the place that people refer to as South Africa. So I just wanted to give you, you know, a heads up of what you're singing and, you know, for the parts that are not necessarily English. So with that being said, can we go back to verse 1? We're going to stand and sing this together. We're going to be singing this throughout the plenary. And standing helps to remember things and sing better. Uhuru. Izwele tu I Africa. We are winning. Shout Uhuru for our freedom. We'll dance and sing songs when like Fannie Lou and Malcolm too. We are. Remember our struggle, always be true. From Harlem to Brazil to Tanzania. We fight to live for a free Africa. We are winning. Long live, long live the liberation of freedom to organization. Socialist, our creation. We are winning. Last verse, Patrice Lumumba's life won't be in vain. Keep up the work in Marcus Garvey's name. Independent and free is what we will be. Africa will pass. Africa will bask in our victory. We are winning. All right, I gotta sing this loud. Long live of our African nation. Freedom through organization. Socialist world. We're good and strong. Yes, we are one. We are winning. We are winning. We are winning. We are winning. Oh.
Applause for Alikia. Now I have the honor of bringing up the Secretary General of the African Socialist International, Luwezi Kinshasa, who is with us all the way from Congo via London to introduce Chairman Omali Yeshitela. Uhuru.
Woo woo. Vanguard up. Vanguard up. Vanguard up. That's right. One Africa. One nation. One Africa. One nation. One Africa. One nation. One nation. One Africa. One nation. One Africa. Just to begin this by saying, I'm just honored. What I feel, I'm humble also sometimes just to be in front of you here, to be in St. Petersburg, the city of African resistance. Just being whole house, we all have houses, but Freedom House, that's incredible. The first time I heard of that concept, Freedom House. That was a profound introduction to the whole movement, just knowing that it's a house just for freedom. We can meet to organize. And you've seen the book, Vanguard. You heard the slogan, Vanguard up. Chairman Omali Stella is the embodiment of that words. you're looking for the meaning of Vanguard, that's Chairman O'Malley Ishitela. You know, all of us read books about Malcolm X, Nkrumah, Lumumba, you know, Marcus Garvey, but that was in the book. You read about them in the book. Brother and sister and comrade, you have the privilege to be with Marcus Garvey today. You have the privilege to be with Patrice Lumumba today. You have the privilege to be with Fanny Lou Hamer today. Because I know in your brain you always wonder how it looks like to be with somebody like Malcolm X. You wonder. You spend a minute with the chairman of Marichela, you know how it looks like to be with Malcolm X. Chairman O'Malley taught us, in fact, teaching us, not touching our past, no, teaching us what freedom is, what you should be fighting for. If today we're talking about to fight for the African nation, he led us to know what the fight is all about. We're talking about building the revolutionary party of the African working class. None of our great leaders solved that question. What type of organization do we need in the United States, in South Africa, in Bahamas, in Tanzania, wherever we are? What type of organization we need to build? That's the African Socialist International. That's the chairman of Marichela creation. If you want to be free, we have to build one single organization. If you want to be free, you need to have your own philosophy that explains the beginning until the end. Today, we can build the socialist world. How will you build a socialist world without the philosophy of African internationalism? So Chairman O'Malley took us to all these questions that we didn't have individually to go through again to think about how you will solve this problem. He has almost single-handedly solved all these problems. So without taking any more time, I'll ask everyone in this room to stand up and to give the warmest applause to welcome our chairman, O'Malley Ishitela. Woo!
Uhuru, comrades, brothers and sisters, I want first to express my appreciation to Comrade Secretary General Louise Kinshasa for that introduction. I'd like to also salute the Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party and the leadership of the African Socialist International that is here now, and all of the leaders of the various mass organizations and committees of the party, and all of you who have come to this first plenary of the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party. I think those of you who've had an opportunity, and I hope that's everybody, to read the political report to this plenary, conscious that we won't be able to go through the entire political report in this one setting at this plenary. But I'm truly calling on everybody, if you have not done so, to go through this political report. One thing is going to have to happen before we leave here is that you're going to have to vote on this political report, on the adoption, the acceptance of this political report to this plenary. But beyond that, I'm convinced that it's important, it's necessary for us to really internalize the content here, to go through it. It's not a typical social media session that we're involved in. I'm told that the attention span on social media is something like 10 seconds. And believe me, we're going to be dealing with much more than 10 seconds in this process. But it's a call on everybody to adopt this political report, to make it your own, so that it's not just a political report of me or the Central Committee or the leadership of the African Socialist International, but the meaning of Vanguard Up, the unity of theory and practice, the significance of the Vanguard Up theme, slogan, demand, more or less. You know, there are two ways you can deal with Vanguard Up. One is Vanguard Up is you know, kind of a verb, right? And but you throw a comma between the Vanguard and up. It's a statement to you. It's Vanguard Up, and it is a call, a demand for everybody in our party, in our organizations, to assume responsibility for this incredible moment in history and for the victory that we have to achieve for the liberation of Africa, African people. And we are convinced that this struggle for the liberation of Africa and African people is the critical force in history that will result in the socialist world that people have talked about for ages before us, subsequent, of course, to the defeat, the attack on our Africa, and the consequences that we and the peoples of the world are experiencing today. We are convinced, and this plenary, the existence of the African People's Socialist Party is a material manifestation of our conviction that we don't have to live in this kind of world. This world that we live in, the social and the political and economic configuration of the world, is something that came into existence through human intervention. Was no gods or anything like this, not even mutants and devils. Human beings created this world, and human beings can assume responsibility for creating another world. We are here in this meeting today because we look out at the world and we don't like it. We don't like what we experience. We don't like what we see happening to our brothers and sisters and people dying in the world where technology has made it possible for every living human being to have everything that we need to survive. Africa itself could feed the world. The Congo, I'm told, has enough hydraulic energy resources that could electrify Africa alone. We don't like this world. We know that the world can be different, and we're determined to change it. Not just because we like to consider ourselves militants or revolutionaries, but we want everybody to be able to feed, clothe, and house themselves, and to do it without the extraordinary competition that has been thrust into human society by, first of all, the slave trade and colonialism that resulted in the advent of capitalism in the world. So that's why we're here. The other thing that I think is really important for us to say and to understand is that this is the party of the working class. The African People's Socialist Party and our members, we are an organization of the advanced detachment of the working class, the vanguard of the working class. And that is not the same as saying that we are the working class. We are the leadership of the class. And you have to assume responsibility for that, because sometimes Africans come into the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement, and they are absolutely the petty bourgeoisie in terms of their location in the economic structure that has been created for us, and they put forth their imitations of what the working class is supposed to be. It used to be a person in a party who really liked to run around in coveralls and boots, combat boots that were never laced and what have you, and he assumed that he was imitating the working class. And I'm saying that this is an African who's never seen a working class community on Sunday mornings or going to the clubs or doing any other thing. That ain't the working class. That's the white man's imitation, the white man's creation of what the African working class is. We don't go nowhere without swag. I don't care how poor we are and what have you. I mean, just black people don't do that. You know, we are the African working class. But there's a tremendous amount of contempt held for the African working class. Obviously, by the imperialist bourgeoisie, that works to our advantage because they do not believe that we are capable of doing what has to be done. And sometimes they convince us that we are not capable of doing what has to be done. And this is one of the struggles that we have to conquer as the party in our own ranks to be able and willing to take up the responsibility for changing the entire world, the planet Earth. And if we come to understand that this planet that we are talking about, certainly the economic and political configuration of the planet rests on our backs, if we understand that clearly, then we understand that all we got to do is stand up. And if we stand up, the whole damn thing comes down. Yeah. That's what our responsibility is as the working class. I've heard at different times stories of Africans who were enslaved, and were concerned about what's going to happen to us if we break free from the master, as these arrogant people would characterize themselves and have us characterize them. What would happen? And we don't forget that it's not the slave master that feeds us. It is the slave that feeds the slave master. We are not dependent on white power. White power is dependent on us. And they cannot win unless they control our brains. And part of the responsibility of this party is to recapture the brains of the African working class. And part of our responsibility in this meeting and others that we have as a party is to make us understand as members of the party that we have the responsibility to win, to carry the entire load. That means we won't talk much in this meeting, in this plenary, about some things, like rules of party discipline, which are extremely important, because you can't win without discipline. And the oppressor teaches us not to be indisciplined. In fact, encourages a lack of discipline among the oppressed. You know, all you want to do is sing and dance. You know, we are the entertainers of the world, Africans are. You know, we throw better footballs and jump higher than anybody else and sing better songs than even the clown who pretend to lead the U.S. imperialism a few years ago did good imitations of Al Green. But we have a greater responsibility to this. The working class must stand up and assume our responsibility, take our brains back, take our courage back. That means the kind of silliness that has been imposed on us, the subjectivism, where we won't carry out the mission because somebody looked at us wrong, because we don't like how they said that. Disregarding what the rules of discipline and what our strategy is, we get off track. We get thrown off track because we don't like somebody, or we don't like how they said that, or we're suspicious of the motives that they have, even when they talk to us about doing what has to be done. We have to get rid of that kind of subjectivism. We have to cast off every element of individualism. And the bourgeoisie teaches us that we are supposed to love individualism. Because that's how white power in Europe is all about. In fact, they all individuals, except they promoted individualism. They say that a problem that Africans have is because we think collectively and not as the individual. They say all progress from their perspective has occurred because every individual is for himself. And this desire to get your own is what creates progress in the world. That's their perspective. And that's not who we are. Because we can't win like that. This is something that disrupts the unity, the cohesion of the group that's necessary to win our freedom. Discipline is fundamental. We have to submit to the party, submit to the discipline of the party. Not because we are submissive, because you submit to white power every day of your existence. The baddest ones of us do that. So what we're saying is we submit to the leadership of the African working class as it represents itself in the African People's Socialist Party. I submit to the party. That's the thing that we have to be able to do, because we are submissive. If we weren't submissive, every time we go to a supermarket or to a department store and some young white colonizer does an insulting or say an insulting thing, or every living, breathing cop that has killed some African in our community and is able to retire someplace without fear, that's evidence of how submissiveness. We submit to the colonizer. We submit to the slave master, but we can't submit to ourselves in pursuit of our liberation. Discipline is absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary. So I just wanted to make some comments about that, what it is that we have to do, what it is that the working class has to do. We have been taught that we are incapable of leading and thinking for ourselves. We have been taught, because we split our verbs and use double negatives and don't talk good English and what have you, that we're not as smart as the petty bourgeoisie. If the petty bourgeoisie was so smart, then why the hell haven't they got us out of this mess that we're in? If the petty bourgeoisie was so smart, how the hell they don't understand, like we understand, who the police is? You understand? If the petty bourgeoisie was so smart, why the hell don't they understand, like we understand, what it is to really go to work? You understand? And to have to survive under these kinds of circumstances. They ain't that damn smart. If they were that smart, they'd be up here having this discussion. You understand? They ain't that damn smart. The working class. That's where all of the activity goes around that produces ideas and thoughts and culture and what have you. It is the activity of the working class that creates all the value. And so somebody would say, well, how you talking about the working class? Because most black people ain't got no damn jobs that I know, and how that, because if they did have employment, generally speaking, most of us would be doing what? We'd have to sell the value of our labor power to make a living. We're the working class. We're unemployed working class. Two, well, what about Professor so-and-so or Attorney so-and-so? These are people who, first of all, most of whom ain't but a generation away or a paycheck away from poverty. But the other thing about that is that these are forces who have abandoned the interests and aspirations of the petty bourgeoisie and have united with the interests and aspiration of the African working class. They don't want to be the petty bourgeoisie, because the petty bourgeoisie, among other things, is a dying social force. Why in the hell would you marry death? That's what Malcolm X used to mean when he said, who wants to integrate into a burning house? The damn thing is coming down and you're trying to get in. And you ain't even the fireman. You understand? So this is, we want to just talk about the responsibility of the class. And to win you to that, to win you to opposition to things like liberalism. Well, it rots the organization. You involved in the organization, stuff going wrong all the time, but you can't say nothing because you don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You can't say anything despite the fact that people who are supposed to carry out the mission constantly abandon the mission and sometimes at critical moments. You have to make those struggles. And it's not about the person who did it in terms of hurting their feelings. It's not about blaming. And this tendency that often we have of avoiding blame. Sometimes not even doing anything because you want to avoid blame. We say criticism and self-criticism are fundamental. Because it's not about blaming and avoiding blame, it's correcting errors. It's identifying contradictions and correcting them. That's why we engage in criticism and self-criticism. So these are just a couple of the other things that I want to make. That's even before we get into the political report. I want to say that Comrade Alex Morley here, who is from the Bahamas, some of you may have first met him because he was one of the prosecutors when the government refused to prosecute Darren Wilson for murdering 18-year-old Mike Brown on August 9th, 2014, we had our own grand jury. And Alex was one of the lawyers, one of the prosecutors. I'm pointing out Alex because I wanted to say something about committing class suicide. Yes. Alex is a lawyer. And in our community, the lawyer is a pretty, big-time guy. You understand? Person. But Alex, we met Alex the first time. Well, we met him first in England, in London. Comrade Secretary General Louise met him first. But I met him in Washington, D.C. at the first Black is Back coalition mobilization that we did. He and Charo, who is currently his wife. But the thing that struck me about them, not the fact that they traveled, they found it and they traveled and they came to participate in the rally and the demonstration. But Alex lives in Nassau. In Nassau, there are all kinds of, like here, symbols of colonial power. They got statues and other kinds of stuff there from colonialism. And Alex, audaciously on one occasion, went out and I think he painted Free Haiti on one of them white people's statues or something like that. And they punished him. They wouldn't let him to take the bar for a year after that. He couldn't even, take the bar. And that's a statement of abandoning the interests of the petty bourgeoisie and uniting with the interests of the masses of the working people. And I really wanted to appreciate Alex for doing that, And there are others of us who might meet the definition criterion for what ordinarily would be considered the African petty bourgeoisie. I ain't calling no more names. But the point is that we are a party of the advanced detachment of the African working class. And those, everybody in this party has assumed the responsibility of being the advanced detachment for that class. This is not because of some romance that we have with the idea of the workers, right? I've known white groups, they've been comprised of doctors and lawyers and what have you, and they quit doctoring and they quit lawyering and went and got jobs in the factory so they can be the working class, you understand? But we could have used them damn doctors and lawyers in the black community, you know what I'm talking about? Che was a doctor, but the point is that the workers create all the value. No lawyers, no doctors, no professors, no bankers, no stockbrokers. All the value is created by workers, by human beings placing our hands to nature and transforming nature so that it serves human beings. These are the workers. And so it is illogical to live in a world where you have socialized production, that is to say, that is production, putting your hands to labor and transforming, and that's what the labor process is. You have socialized labor, which means that people engage in labor collectively, sometimes in the same factories, but sometimes it spans the globe. Socialized labor on the one hand, but then you have private ownership of that which is produced by labor on the other hand. So you got socialist production and private ownership. There's something wrong with that. Here's somebody never worked in her life, who owns and controls the means of production, and those who produce every damn thing got nothing but misery. And so it's logical to us that those who collectively produce value in the society ought to collectively own the value in society. That's not something we just made up, and as clever as Marx may be assumed to have been, that was the way we've always done it before Marx was even born or thought of. That is a part of what Africa is. That's the whole notion that so many are opposed to, this collective, how we think of the collective, because that's how we produce collectively. We had collective ownership, even in Africa today. even though it's being overturned every moment, that nobody, it's hard to find individuals who own the land. People are skating around that and coming up with other contrivances and what have you to give the appearance of collective ownership, even though it's turned into something else. But the point I'm making is that's part of our tradition. We didn't need Marx to teach us that. We didn't need Engels or Lenin to teach us that, which is not to say that Marx and Engels and Lenin didn't teach us some things, you know. So anyway, these are just some observations that I wanted to make, and then with your permission, I'll go ahead and we can start going through the political report. As I said, I won't read the entire report, but I'll tell you how we are moving as we move. And there are some things that have to be changed in the political report, some minimum things, not major. We have to increase the mandate, for example, as it relates specifically to the Department of Agitation and Propaganda, and there are probably some other areas where that is also the case. For example, we didn't mandate, though we had talked about it, that there has to be timelines developed for collecting and producing writings of Comrade Secretary General Louis Kinshasa. That's we way behind on having that done. So that's one of the things, and there are other things as well. So Africa and comrades, I really want to express my appreciation for everybody coming out to this plenary, this first plenary of the 7th Congress. And I'm going to go ahead and begin reading from the political report. And I will really call on your patience, because I know how it is to sit and participate in these long readings, and I can't do it like Martin Luther King, so it might get a little boring. Again, the theme of this first plenary is Vanguard Up, the unity of theory and practice. The title of the party's 7th Congress was not casually chosen. Vanguard, the advanced detachment of the African Revolution, is a title that reflects the weight that our party has carried nearly alone since our 1972 founding. Our October 2018 Congress occurred at a time when it was absolutely necessary for the benefit of our revolution and our party to break from the pack as a party, and also for each party member to assume the responsibility of being the vanguard. Some militants have resisted recognition that the black revolution of the 60s suffered military defeat. The admission of military defeat clashes with the romantic notion of revolutionary invincibility. Without this recognition, we operate under the false assumption that there has been uninterrupted revolutionary continuity since the 1960s. We are challenging the pervasive myth that many events represent victory for African people, while in fact they were merely a counterinsurgent substitute for revolution. This is why individuals like Barack Hussein Obama and other opportunists are sometimes incorrectly viewed as successors to an unbroken trajectory of our movement for democracy and black power that inspired, organized, and mobilized millions of Africans and others within the U.S. and around the world. Many who participated in the black revolution of the 60s, including its leaders, were swept up in the historic inertia that overtook the oppressed of the world. In the 1960s, joining the revolution was the most natural thing you could do, as revolution was clearly the most influential driving force in the world. Revolutionary enthusiasm alone could not bestow our movement with the science of revolution, however. Sometimes it is merely the heat of the moment or youthful exuberance in the face of recognizable injustices that thrusts people onto the path of revolution. Our party continues to engage in revolutionary struggle today because early on in our development, we acquired the science of revolution that provided the political stamina to withstand and learn from the contradictions we encountered. Indeed, we learned and developed from the defeat of the revolution. This despite the fact that individual members of our party have from time to time succumbed to the doubts and difficulties inherent in the struggle for liberation, unification, and socialism. In our early years, our party fought pitched battles with elements of the Black liberation movement to call attention to a general disdain for theory and ideological weaknesses that characterized the African anti-colonial movement of which we were a part. Those of us serious about liberation had to be able to project and defend the position of liberation versus the liberal capitulationist line of assimilation. We were determined to fight our way out of the swamps of ideological obscurantism being deliberately imposed on our struggle. This ability to throw up obstacles to our ideological clarity was tied to the jailings, slanders, and assassinations of our revolutionary anti-colonial leaders and political philosophers. The heated struggles of African people during the 1950s and 60s opened the door to hundreds of questions and that demanded resolution as a continuation, as a condition for the further development of our revolution. As we know, the imperialist powers led by the U.S. government waged a major attack on our revolution, crushing it before these questions could be satisfactorily resolved. For most people, that was the end of it. We of the African People's Socialist Party, however, continued to lead and develop politically and organizationally, even after much of our movement had been destroyed. This is why we are here today, as compared to all of the short-term revolutionaries unable to overcome the ideological limitations, surrendering to the diversions of the pedestrian struggle for survival under foreign colonial capitalist domination. Revolution is not simply an aspiration. It is the height of the unbridled participation of the masses in political life. Revolution is distinguished from riots and spontaneous uprisings by organization and leadership. Our oppressors recognize this, and they have created a multifaceted science to prevent or destroy revolution. And this is critical, to prevent or destroy revolution. And to not be confused, again, with protests or uprisings, etc. In fact, right now, it is probably true that St. Louis is the center of the protest movement of the country, maybe of the world. They have more protests, more professional protesters in St. Louis per square inch probably than any place else. And it is accommodated by the government. The protesters don't have anything they are protesting about. There's no to what end. Sometimes they will go out and they say, we're going to block the interstates, and the police will accommodate them. The police will come, stop the cars on the interstate, let them sit in the interstate and chant for 15 minutes and say, okay, and then they leave, and then the cars can go again. Nothing has changed at all. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about to what end? To what end? And that's the question that we raised when we first went into St. Louis after the murder of Mike Brown, or I should say, after the uprising that happened in the working class community in Canfield Drive in Ferguson, St. Louis. So we say that our oppressors recognize that revolutions are led, and they have created a multifaceted science to prevent or destroy revolution. This science is called counterinsurgency and employs all forms of warfare, including psychological, economic, political, and especially military. When the African People's Socialist Party was founded in 1972, the Black Revolution of the 60s was on its last leg. Patrice Lumumba had been overthrown and butchered in Congo. That's not hyperbole, what they did to Lumumba. Literally, they butchered Lumumba. This is the horrible disdain, on the one hand, that they have for African leaders and revolution, but it's also the fear that they have of African revolution, and because they didn't want any remnants of Lumumba to be left, so that the oppressed African people would be able to rally around the example that he set for our liberation. So even while it was brutal and they butchered Lumumba, on the one hand, it was based on fear of the African masses. Kwame Nkrumah was deposed in Ghana. Malcolm X, our most influential anti-colonial ideological leader, had been assassinated in the U.S. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who massified the struggle for democracy under colonial capitalism, was shot dead. Che Guevara had been wounded, captured, and murdered by the CIA in Bolivia. And Fred Hampton, the last remaining authoritative leader of the Black Panther Party in this country, was murdered in what was clearly indicated as a coup de grace to our revolution. It was only because we recognized the defeat of the Black Revolution that the African People's Socialist Party was able to set ourselves on the conscious mission to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. It made us impervious to the efforts of most aspects of the counterinsurgency. We set ourselves to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s. It is a crucial thing, to even to have survived organization for that period of time, and to even as an organization come into existence through first relationship to SNCC, the Civil Rights Movement. This has been a continuum that we've been involved in, as compared to people who discovered struggle, say like on August 9th, 2014, which we saw a resurgence, a reinvigoration of the liberation movement, but people who were there, I actually think they started from that point. They did not have the ability to start from this critical moment in history where a revolution occurred in this country and much of the world. Revolution. And the imperialist forces crushed the revolution, so they want to do civil rights all over again. People who came up, say, with Ferguson and Mike Brown, they starting with a damn civil rights movement. With hands up, don't shoot, with Black Lives Matter. They're trying to take us backwards in history, when the thing is we have to begin to complete the job that we started some time ago. Malcolm started, Garvey started, Lumumba started, and Nkrumah started, Nat Turner started, the revolution started, and it wasn't about, you ever heard of Nat Turner saying, hands up, don't shoot, Black Lives Matter, or something like that, nor Che, nor anybody serious about overturning our conditions of existence, and that's what we're struggling around. And at this moment in time, it's crucial that we achieve the greatest amount of ideological clarity as possible, but not just achieve ideological clarity, but our practice must reflect that, and we must begin to draw lines in the sand. Because the people can't find you if they can't tell you from everybody else. You can't be no chameleon, you understand, and then win masses to the revolutionary project. So we say, in the first place, it kept revolution on the party's agenda. We did not detour down the opportunist path of reformism, looking to find a way to make our colonial existence more palatable. We set out early on to expose and defeat the counterinsurgency that has played such a debilitating role in our struggle for more than 2 generations. Today, unlike the 1960s, with the exception of our party, there's no general recognition of the need for goals, objectives, and method of revolution. The mission to complete the Black Revolution of the 60s is what helps to set the party apart, in front, in the vanguard. We are not an organization that is starting anew after some recent epiphany. Our starting point is the Black Revolution of the 60s and not the latest egregious colonialist offense. The African People's Socialist Party is the only organization in the world that has maintained this crucial responsibility for all these years. Since our founding in 1972, we have never stopped struggling for liberation and socialism. We have never stopped fighting for the total liberation of Africa as the fundamental component of the worldwide struggle to defeat imperialism and liberate the oppressed nations, peoples, and workers of the world. Because we never stopped struggling, our party has continued to develop politically and ideologically long after the counterinsurgency of the 60s neutralized the general revolutionary trajectory of our movement. This ongoing political and ideological development is what contributes to our status as the advanced detachment, the vanguard. Effectively, we have become the custodians of the worldwide African revolution, the critical strategic component of the global anti-imperialist revolution. The responsibility to expose and defeat the worldwide U.S. counterinsurgency is one we sought to share with the existing remnants of the black revolution of the 60s. We worked tirelessly to unite the revolutionary anti-colonial tendencies of what remained of our struggle. In 1991, we published Black Power Since the 1960s, a small book based on a series of articles that appeared in the Burning Spear newspaper over a number of months. The main target of these polemics was the opportunist theory of New Africanism that was based on the premise that 5 southern U.S. states are the national homeland of U.S.-based Africans. This position was adapted from an earlier Communist Party effort to win the loyalty of African people in the U.S. away from the movement of Marcus Garvey by claiming that instead of Africa, the national homeland of African people in the U.S. is the U.S. Black Belt South. Beginning in the late 1960s, the Black Belt South theory was regurgitated by several groups, mostly connected with the Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, RNA. In one passage, we addressed the approach by our party in the struggle against the prevailing counterinsurgency and why our approach required the anti-colonial unity of the African victims of the counterinsurgency. It was an approach in contention with the Black Belt South tendency as represented by the Republic of New Africa and NAPO, the New African People's Organization, which criminalized African people pushed into the influential U.S. government-imposed counterinsurgent drug economy. I want to say something just briefly about that. We have criticized, this is not something talking behind the back saying that, the leaders go with white women or do, some other kind of stuff like that. We engage in serious, open, ideological struggle. First of all, struggle with the overall liberation movement at the time for a disdain for theory. That theory, if you don't have theory, if you don't have a theory a philosophy that makes a statement of our place and destiny in the world, which is what philosophy does. If you don't have that, if you don't say this is our destiny, this is what we're struggling for, then anything will serve along the way. That's why people have said that this creates spontaneous events. Like because of this lack of theory, because there was not our work and philosophy, our work was not tethered to long-term philosophy. When the white power selected Barack Hussein Obama to be the public face of imperialism, we saw people who we worked with since the 1960s who were self-proclaimed black nationalists, 5-state people, 5-state nationalists, people who call themselves communists and Marxists and all of that. They forgot all of that and jumped on board with Obama. And it's like their position was, there but by the grace of God go I, in terms of Marcus Garvey, of this guy, what's his name? Barack Obama. Without theory, that's what opportunism is. So they're going to get a free ride from this Negro, right? This criminal. You have to be a criminal. If the United States government, if the ruling class in this country wants you to preside, wants you to be the public face of imperialism, you have to be a criminal. You have to be a criminal. And not only do you have to be a criminal, they have to know you're a criminal. They have to have given you the gun and let you shoot somebody so that if you back up, they have that on you. They know what they have when they have nothing. They're not like you. See, somebody can tell you, yeah, I'm black, 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 and that'll do. But white power don't play that. You got to prove it before they let you put your hand in the till. You've already proven to them that you'll do any damn thing for white power. So we said that this theory, the 5-state theory, is opportunist. It's opportunist for a number of reasons. One, how in the hell can suddenly all the black people in the world come under assault? Because we did not pop up in this country under some turnip leaf in a cotton plantation in Mississippi. We got here as captives. In order to capture us, they had to first do what? Attack Africa. And so the attack on Africa that has been ongoing left Africa in the condition that it's in, and then left us in the condition that we're in all around the world. So whether we're in the Bahamas, or whether we're in Mississippi, or whether we are in Ghana, the reality is what we are living with is conditions that were imposed on us by imperialism that came into existence at our whole expense. It didn't come into existence at the expense of black people in Mississippi. Our history did not start in a damn slave plantation. Don't tell me that somehow something happened to us when we were in Mississippi, Alabama, South, North Carolina, etc., that transformed us into something else.
Come on.
That's not how we understand history works. And so that's one of the things. Another thing is, if you can say that it's ours because we live here, you know, remember what Malcolm said about that, right? He said sometimes chickens are born in ovens, but that don't make them biscuits, right? You know, so just because you're here does not make you something else, right? It just makes you somebody who's confused about your identity. That's one of the things I appreciated about the original Nation of Islam. They said the last name, put an X there, the unknown. Don't know what the hell my last name is. That's why I'm Malcolm X. I refuse to be Malcolm Jones. I refuse to be Malcolm. And it unites us, whether we intend to or not, with the attack on the indigenous people in this land. Who living in concentration camps that they refer to as Indian reservations. You understand? And whatever your intentions are, you ultimately end up uniting as a part of the effort to keep this land from the indigenous people. And the loss of the land is fundamental to the oppression that's being experienced today by the people who they call Indians in this country. So that's another aspect of it. You unite with every cracker that went into southern Africa and they said that, well, they weren't doing anything in the land. I've been here for a long time. It's mine. That's what opportunism does. That's what that philosophy does. And that's one of the reasons we say that it's problematic as hell. We don't have a solution. Ain't going to be no St. Petersburg Revolution. Ain't going to be no Ghana Revolution. Ain't going to be no Bahamian Revolution. We're going to have to take the whole damn ball of wax. That's what's going to have to happen. And because that's the thing that's going to relieve us every place. I want to say you can look it up. I don't remember the times. I think it may have been starting sometime around the 11th century, where Europe engaged people in what they now refer to as the Middle East in a criminal war. They call it a holy war. They said they were looking for the Holy Grail. And the Pope sent them out on this crusade. And they butchered and looted all over this area they call the Middle East. And it was fought on a religious banner. A religious banner is holy, but we're going to take the loot any damn way. You understand? And of course, it was a looting expedition that was fought under religious banner. But what has happened subsequent to that is that Muslims all around the world, that whole thing that happened there, it's become fixed in their identity and responsible for the ability of jihadists and Muslims and stuff everywhere around the world to respond to how they identify this contradiction. And you and I, we can't respond to any damn thing because we are black Brits, Afro-Swedes. These are people I've met. You know, African Americans, that's the latest, one of the latest things that we are. We've been some horrible things here, etc. We have no, we are Ghanaians, Nigerians, other things that have been created for us to be. And it comes at the expense of the group. We have to unite. We are 1 billion strong. Why the hell would I want my identity to be, you know, like Marcus Garvey used to talk about it all the time. You know, why would I want to just identify with this little tiny island here when Africa, for Africans at home and abroad? at home and abroad. And that's what we have to understand. That's the solution to our issues and our problem. Right, Sadie? I know you agree. So we said that this is an opportunist philosophy because it solves the opportunism is selling out the long-term interest, sacrificing the long-term interest of the class for some short interest of the petty bourgeoisie. And the African petty bourgeoisie everywhere suffered from, in many instances, loss of land and resources and the ability to be the chief. And in this country, that happened too. And so, and the same thing happened with these white people in Europe who understood that the way forward was imperialism. Everything that Europe has, it developed as a consequence of invading, capturing other territories and countries. That's where the wealth of Europe came from. And so this became understood to be the way to achieving resources. Cecil Rhodes was quoted by V.I. Lenin as saying that I was walking through someplace in East London, and the workers were demanding bread. They were in uprising. He said that it helped me to understand that if to save England, we have to become imperialists. This way we get rid of the excess population in England, and then we capture all these resources, and that's where South Africa and Rhodesia and all these other places, Cecil Rhodes did that. He understood that. And the white people who got left out of the deal, who were in Europe and who had this vicious history of historical relationship with other white people, declared that the land first they declared that Uganda was a national homeland for these white people, and since that didn't float, I guess, too well, they declared that Palestine was a national homeland for these white people, and if you didn't believe it, God gave it to them several thousand years ago. That's what they said. And I wouldn't hang out with that God because I'm telling you, a God that's a real estate dealer, that's an untrusted cat. I'm telling you, this cat dealing in real estate. I haven't met a real estate guy yet, who didn't have all kinds of clauses in there that justifies doing horrible things to you. So it's an opportunist approach. That's our struggle we had with them. You're selling out the long-term interests of the class for some short-term. It's a class question. And this is something that Africans have to get used to. Because, there's a traditional saying that we have, well, all of us black people don't give a damn. All of us black, they kill you, black. Yeah, we are all Africans. And we unite that we suffer national oppression, which means all of us as a people, the nation, suffer oppression because we live under colonial domination. But the solution for colonial domination is different for the African petty bourgeoisie than it is for the working class. The African petty bourgeoisie just want to get in shape as much as the white bosses. Want to be like the white man, want to get as much as the white man get. Just not interested in overturning the social system at all. Not interested in the aspiration and the requirement of the masses of African working people who create all the value and who created that nigga. You know what I'm saying? So that's the petty bourgeoisie looking out for its own interests. And that's what they used against Nkrumah. Nkrumah talking about a united Africa, he just wanted to be the president of all Africa, which means I can't be the president of Ghana, and I can't be the president of Nigeria, and I can't be the president of all these other places. That's the thing that they do to us. They have us fighting for these little penny-ante nothings. You understand? So that we sacrifice. That's where they come up with Ados, some kind of African descendants of, American descendants of slaves. What in the hell is that? Anyway, so we say, we're talking here now about something that we published, a pamphlet, because we engaged in a series of polemics. And we were talking about how opportunist theory will result in opportunist politics, opportunist activity. And so the U.S. government, the American government, the American government put drugs in denied African people the ability to have employment in the legal capitalist system, you can't work, boy. You couldn't get a job. And so they denied us participation in the legal capitalist economy, and then they created an illegal capitalist economy for us to participate in. And they weren't doing that to do a favor for us. For one thing, they needed the money. When the 1980s, when this whole drug economy was created, the American economy was in big time trouble. It was in huge trouble. And they used the drugs, among other things, not the only thing, the basis of it, but among other things, they used the drugs to create a voluntary tax on the poorest sector of the African community. They went into a laboratory. They didn't put cocaine in our community. They went into a laboratory and took the cocaine and created what they call a derivative called crack. It was deadly. And they put it in our communities. So you can't have a job with them, but then they began to employ us as dope pushers. As dope pushers. The CIA brought crack cocaine. The CIA is the one who created Freeway, what was his name? Ricky. They created him. He had never seen cocaine in his life until the CIA gave it to him. And this was a means by which it was a counterinsurgent war that was made on the one hand against people in Vietnam. They were fighting war in Vietnam against the people there. The American government did this. They were engaged in war, the people in Vietnam, in the so-called Golden Triangle, where most of the opium of the world was coming from, or at that moment. And so they were making war there against the people, taking the opium, and then bringing it back, initiating a war against another colonial subject people right here in the United States, the African population. It was devastating. It was devastating. And you couldn't tell somebody that. You're trying to tell me the government would sell, they sold your grandmammy, why in the hell wouldn't they sell drugs? Why the hell wouldn't they sell drugs? They sold your grandmama. You think so highly of them, you know, that they won't sell drugs. They done sold your grandmama. That's how you got here, Negro. You understand? Anyway, so we had struggles with this. We say opportunist theory will lead to opportunist practices. So engage in this struggle around this, because we engage in the struggle. The reason this guy, Gary Webb, who was in San Jose, you will see speeches I made at San Jose State. Even before Gary Webb wrote the book that came to be called as Dark Alliances, about the CIA, you will see us doing demonstrations in the streets of Oakland. We will see us creating the thing that Dave Chappelle, I don't guess he knows the origin, I think he thinks it came from Dead Press, where we said what? The White House is the rock house, and Uncle Sam is the pusher man. You understand? So we recognize right away that we engage in a counterinsurgency. The United States government has put these drugs to destroy revolution and the capacity of revolution. So we said ours in dealing with this question was the approach of the Vanguard as revealed here. Quote, and this is from the book that we published, I think in 1991. The approach of our party has been to identify the counterinsurgency in all of its obvious components as the primary contradiction, and to attempt to win all in our oppressed colonial community to struggle against the counterinsurgency, including the government importation of drugs into our community and the vicious war against our people in the name of the U.S. government's war on drugs. This approach makes the government the enemy and calls on everyone, including the penny-ante drug dealers, to unite against the government in every way, including the cessation of distribution and usage of drugs. The other approach makes the African youth the enemy and unites with the government campaign against them. It is precisely because of this theoretical reliance on the African working class as the social base upon which revolutionary struggle must depend that our party has been the only organization capable of targeting the counterinsurgency, which targets the African working class, employed and unemployed, as the primary victim. The theory of our party informs us that without the conscious participation and leadership of the African working class, there will be no revolution. But because the counterinsurgency targeted the working class, none of the anti-colonial organizations was able to recognize it. Most of them, some more than others, actually united with the counterinsurgency slander against our people and the so-called war against drugs initiated by U.S. President Ronald Wilson Reagan and continued under the regime of U.S. CIA President George Herbert Walker Bush. I'm going to have to read fast. Now, people are signaling me that we don't have enough time for me to go off on these jaunts, unquote. Our party initiated unsuccessful efforts to bring various elements of the anti-colonial, pro-independence sector of our movement under one organizational umbrella, a single party that included the then existing African People's Party, APP, All African People's Revolutionary Party, AAPRP, Provisional Government of the Republic of New Africa, RENA, and another armed wing of the movement. By 1974, the African People's Socialist Party was actively moving to internationalize African unity and to build the African Socialist International, ASI, by joining with the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, to liberate Zimbabwe from the clutches of the white settler state of Rhodesia. We saw the ZANU movement at the time, along with the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, PAC, in colonial South Africa, as the closest potential for the creation of an all-African revolutionary party, specifically the African Socialist International, that would direct the struggle for a liberated and socialist Africa under the leadership of the African working class, organized in our own revolutionary party. Later, we sent envoys to the New Jewel movement of Grenada and to Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso in our ASI building efforts. This stemmed in part from the lessons we learned from the 60s that convinced us the African Revolution had run into its limitations when fought within the imperialist-created colonial borders in Africa and among Africans throughout the world. These limitations included the ability of imperialists to destroy our struggle on separate fronts without having to fight against the entire African Revolution. We were incapable of developing a strategic approach to the overall struggle for the liberation of our people worldwide. The setbacks caused by the assassinations of our leaders in Congo and Ghana are only two of the most notable examples of the limitations imposed by adherence to the borders. In addition, the fact that the Soviet Union at the time was able to declare that there were only 6 revolutionary organizations in all of Africa deserving of its support was evidence of the need for the African Revolution to define for itself what constituted revolutionary organization. This was critical. I mean, because we had a situation where the African Revolution, African people all around the world were just dominated by nasty white colonial powers and looking for whatever assistance that could be got from anybody. And the Communist International, the Soviet Union and the remnants of the Communist International had declared that in Africa there were only 6 authentic revolutionary organizations. They were called the Authentic Six. And they decided that these are the organizations that they would give material, ideological training, they would give political training and resources too. And just these 6. And so, and that, of course, meant that these were organizations that met the requirements, the needs of whatever Soviet foreign policy objectives happened to be. And so, and you know, that was ZAPU, not ZANU. That was SWANU, no, SWAPO, not SWANU. And, you know, a host of other kinds of organizations that they had declared were the only ones. So we said, you know, we have to make a decision of ourselves, you know, what constitutes a genuine revolutionary movement, and collectively we can train and fund ourselves. And so that was one of the things that informed how we moved. So it was we who needed to determine what was necessary to collectivize our separate efforts and to give a coherent response to our joint oppression and exploitation. So we created a new front behind enemy lines. In 1976, the party opened a critical new front in our struggle with the creation of the African People's Solidarity Committee, APSC. Through this organization of white colonizer nationals, the party took the struggle for black power into the cities, communities, neighborhoods, and homes of the colonizers. With the Solidarity Committee, we created a division of labor that contributed to the ability of the party to concentrate primarily on the political struggles directly confronting our colonized nation. APSC actively works to fracture the reactionary unity of the colonizer nation. It works to fracture the reactionary unity of the colonizer nation through winning political and material solidarity from among the colonizers. Indeed, the absolute unity of white people with their own ruling class has been forever fractured by the existence of the African People's Solidarity Committee. They can't do that no more. The African People's Solidarity Committee works directly under the leadership of the party. This is crucial because the role played by opportunism in undermining our struggle against colonial capitalism. Of course, a significant location of this opportunism has been with the participation of colonizer nation whites, liberals, and leftists. Their comfortable place on the pedestal of our colonial oppression made it possible and likely that they would fight and settle for political solutions that fell far short of destruction of the colonialism that fed, clothed, and housed them. As we summed up in the chapter, The Theory of African Internationalism, in the political report to the party's 6th Congress published as an uneasy equilibrium, the African Revolution versus parasitic capitalism, quote, Africans are not a race but a nation of people, forcibly dispersed throughout the globe. We have been pushed out of history by our imperialist oppressors, partially through the concept of race. You know, African people left Africa and then disappeared. We disappeared. You know, and so we were no longer Africans. We became some kind of race out here. And so we are 1 billion strong and don't even recognize each other. Generally speaking, that's the task that our party's taken on. So we say the definition of the conditions of African people inside the U.S. and around the world as colonialism and not racism informed our party's practice since our very foundation and was fundamental to our struggle to complete the black revolution of the 60s. We published the pamphlet, Colonialism, the Major Problem Facing Black People in the U.S. And you'll see up here a pamphlet that was published by one of the precursors to the party, Jomo, in 1971, raising the colonial contradiction. Through this understanding, we were correctly able to define the white population of the U.S. and worldwide, not as racist, but as the colonizer nation whose entire existence rests on the pedestal of the colonial domination of African people and the majority of humanity. We were very clear that white liberals and leftists are part of the colonizer nation. As such, they bring an imperial attitude and the power of the colonizer into every relationship they enter, both personal and political. Thus, on occasion, we have branded them ideological imperialists and Ku Klux communists. In an effort to obscure this colonial relationship, liberals of both the colonizer and colonized nations refer to their status as white privilege. It is actually the privilege of the colonizer over the colonized, in the same way that slave owners have privilege compared to the enslaved. When engaging in the fight against colonialism, we cannot make the assumption that the colonized can eliminate the privilege without destroying the system of colonialism any more than the enslaved could end the privilege of the enslaver without the destruction of slavery, right? So, when not under the leadership of the party and left to their own devices, this relationship has resulted in colonizer nation leftists fighting for or having actual power within our movement and thereby reinforcing the colonial domination that oppresses our people. See, if you fall for the racism thing, then all the white people who come into the organization have to do is not say nigger and not do this and that kind of thing. But if you recognize you're talking about colonialism, the colonizer, all white people are part of the colonizer nation as Africans are colonized. Therefore, you can come to a political understanding and create a political relationship based on politics and this recognition as opposed to on whether somebody like you or not, or whether they act right or not, or whether they dance well to James Brown. So we say that opportunism within the colonized nation, African nation, resulted in African capitulation to white left and liberal demands and aspirations as a condition for acquiring their support, which in any case was mostly verbal and charitable. This kind of relationship actually undermined African self-determination. The unity of theory and practice requires concrete material solidarity with the anti-colonial struggle led by the colonized ourselves. This was a challenge to the cheap, meaningless slogans preferred by white communists and opportunist African assimilationist liberals for black and white to unite and fight. These empty slogans fail to target colonialism, a stand that demands both the recognition of the requirement for the colonized to lead our own struggle and an active fight against our colonial domination. The party's practical work in this arena also contributed to our pioneering theoretical work that revealed the historical contradiction in the struggle for socialism, namely that the colonial white working class has functioned as a retardant on the fight against capitalism. Marx's early dictum that wage slavery in Europe required as a pedestal slavery pure and simple in the New World was simply another way of saying that all capitalist activity rests on a foundation of the oppression of the colonial subjects of the world. Slavery and colonial capitalism not only gave birth to the bourgeoisie of the white working class, of the white ruling class, it was also the progenitor or parent of the white working class. Say it again. Slavery and colonial capitalism not only gave birth to the bourgeoisie or the white ruling class, it was also the progenitor or parent of the white working class. All of them were given birth by slavery and colonialism. And this is something that's really important to recognize. It was slavery and colonialism that dragged the white peasants and others living in feudalism out of that situation and improved their lot, which made it possible for Marx and others to characterize something like capitalism being progressive, because it progressed the white people who were serfs and peasants from that circumstance under feudalism, and it made it possible for them to go out and sell the value of their labor power to anybody who they could sell it to. That was progress, according to Marx. But the problem here is that it was slavery and colonialism that made that possible. So we weren't even visible. So here you got the end of feudalism and the improvement of the conditions of existence for white toilers in Europe, moving them from feudalism to capitalism. But capitalism, slavery, and colonialism took us into the situation that we're in today. I don't know if I'm clear on that or not. You see, and so then you have this reflex, and people try to understand, well, why do the white working class always do something that's uniting with the white ruling class? They work with the white ruling class because both of them are struggling for their own salvation. Anytime revolution or struggle happens in the world, it changes this, it changes the construct that makes, it threatens the existence of this social system. And both the white workers and the white ruling class came into existence and benefit from the existing colonial creation. So that's the basis of the opportunism. And so that's the basis of the ability to so easily settle for something less than what the hell the rest of us need. Without revolutionary African internationalist leadership, the majority of whites of the colonizer nation experienced a crisis of imperialism as their own, and not without reason. This is why solidarity with the colonized African working class, working under its leadership, cannot be seen as beneficent charity on the part of the colonizer nation leftists, but as recognition that the road to socialism truly is painted black. So, you know, this is, well, anyway, I won't mess with that because I got to expedite this process. People are looking at me with dagger eyes and saying, why are you taking so long? You know, we got to get through this. So, the strategic leadership of the overall fight against capitalism is to be found in the struggle against colonialism, the pedestal. The strategic leadership of the struggle for socialism is to be found in the party of the African working class that must lead the anti-colonial struggle for national liberation, thereby depriving the capitalist parasite of its life-giving colonized host. The African People's Socialist Party has provided the theoretical leadership that has long been missing from the struggle for African liberation and the defeat of capitalism and the victorious emergence of socialism. The December 2013 political report to our sixth Congress, employing groundbreaking African internationalist analysis, elaborated on the critical role of the African liberation movement in the defeat of capitalism. Quote, the white left has always been locked into a worldview that places the location of Europeans at the center of the universe. If this were not the case, Marx would have been forced to declare that the road to socialism is painted black, the destruction of the pedestal upon which all capitalist activity occurs, not some maturation of contradictions within European capitalist society resting upon the pedestal, is the key to overturning imperialist capitalism. In his earlier work, The Poverty of Philosophy, Marx made this startling admission, quote, direct slavery is just as much the pivot of bourgeois industry as machinery, credits, etc. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery that gave the colonies their value. It is the colonies that created world trade, and it is world trade that is the precondition for large-scale industry. Without slavery, North America, the most progressive of countries, would be transformed into a patriarchal country. Wipe North America off the map of the world, and you will have anarchy, the complete decay of modern commerce and civilization. Cause slavery to disappear, and you will have wiped America off the map of nations. What an excellent formula for the overthrow of capitalism, right? The slavery of today is comprised of the colonial, subject, and oppressed peoples of the world. The existence of our party and the convening of our sixth Congress are part of the trajectory to cause slavery to disappear and objectively to achieve the consequence predicted by Marx. From its inception, our party has fought for ideological clarity. We rejected the mysticism and other forms of philosophical idealism that characterized much of the anti-colonial tendency of our struggle. Our position was then as it is now. Theory is critical, but theory that cannot be implemented is worthless. It is in the spirit of the oft-recognized maxim by Karl Marx that, quote, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it, unquote. We too believe that there must be a unity of theory and practice. And in the party we often state, it's not what we say, it's what we do. Our theory is African internationalism, an advanced scientific revolutionary theory of practice. It was with this clarity that we struggled with both African and white left opportunists to expose and defeat the counterinsurgency. Indeed, it was this clarity that enabled us to survive the counterinsurgency and emerge as the vanguard. African internationalism recognized by Columbia University. On January 24, 2019, the Oxford Union of Britain's University of Oxford, one of the most prestigious bourgeois universities in the world, hosted a debate on the Africa question where I spoke as an invited participant. There was a total of 6 participants in the debate, 3 on each side of the question of the desirability of greater African unity. However, it was clear from the beginning that the Oxford Union and all the debate participants were most interested in my contribution to the debate, and that it was my participation that allowed the event to even be characterized as a debate. The Oxford Union's letter of invitation, there was one African there who was a former U.S. ambassador to the Organization of African Unity, who after I spoke, and he was supposed to be on my side, but after I spoke, stood up and said that he is a proud African American and an Anglophile. proud African American and Anglophile. So the Oxford Union's letter of invitation recognized the theoretical contributions of African internationalism that was the basis for the invitation. Part of the reason we're having this discussion is because for the last few decades, the liberation movement of African people, not just here but everywhere, has lacked any kind of coherence. And that's been one of the problems that we've been struggling with here. You know, there was the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement. What the hell are we fighting for now, right? And so what we seem to be fighting for now is anything that comes up or anything left over. And so, you know, that's the issue. That's the problem that we are resolving, that we are talking about resolving now. We have been working for 40 years or more resolving that. We are here in a place that stands for that resolution, that represents resolution to that. We have relationships represent the resolution to this vacuous, this ambiguous thing that was even difficult to characterize as a movement. It's just different groups doing stuff, right? And so this is why we spend this discussion on theory and stuff like that. It's not because, you know, I know we learn to hate theory and philosophy and stuff like that because there's always some professor pontificating, you know, about stuff that's so foreign and distant from the reality of our people, you know, that we don't engage in that. And secondly, because we're intimidated, because the way they talk and the words they use and stuff like that, you know, it's not something that we, you know, are familiar with most of the time. And they're talking above our heads and stuff like that. But we're taking philosophy and theory right down into the barrios and to the so-called ghettos and the townships all over Africa and various other places. That's where we're taking it, because the masses of the African workers must be armed to the teeth. And whether they got an AK-47 or not, they must be armed theoretically. They must have theory to understand what the hell are we fighting for, right? So, the Oxford Union's letter of invitation recognized the theoretical contributions of African internationalism that was the obvious basis for the invitation. We are clear that the bourgeoisie would have its own reasons for offering the invitation to me, not the least being the anticipation that African internationalism is the advanced theory of the oppressed that is increasingly guiding the struggle of Africans and other subject peoples against imperialism that the international bourgeoisie will have to fight. You know, Malcolm X was there 55 years earlier than I. And they brought Malcolm at a critical time in the struggle of our people in this country. In fact, he was killed just a few days after he left Oxford. But what was happening was that the civil rights movement, as quiet as it's kept now, was struggling. It was really struggling to maintain its relevance among the mass of African people. Black people were moving in another direction. Malcolm X had left the Nation of Islam, was setting off on a whole new path, and they recognized, the bourgeoisie recognized that something new was afoot. And to get in front of that, they had Malcolm to come to Oxford. And when Malcolm speaks, he's speaking to all of these people who are students, who are going to be part of the international neo-colonial class all over the world, and also gives them access to what he's thinking, how things are going to unfold. Of course, Malcolm predicted that he would be dead shortly, and they killed him shortly after that, but that was why he was invited there. So we had no illusions about going to Oxford, but we wanted Oxford too. We wanted it also partially because Malcolm had been there. We thought that was extremely important. And we wanted it also because it was going to give us access to so many peoples around the world. Not just access, but theory. Because I have seen another really popular African with a lot of degrees and stuff in front of him who spoke at Oxford, and it was more like a buffoonery, it was like a performance, you know. But anyway, here's a letter of invitation that they sent to me. This is a meaningful passage, as we say. However, from our perspective, the Oxford event served to validate African internationalism as a legitimate philosophical system within bourgeois academia and thereby gives us access to an international community that we could not have achieved alone. Subsequently, at least 2 million Africans and others have seen the debate that has been shared thousands of times on social media. The letter of invitation from the Oxford Union for our participation in the debate was clear in its recognition of the contributions of our party to the body of socialist and revolutionary theory. Here's a meaningful passage. Quote, "Dear Mr. Ishitella, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to extend an invitation to speak at the Oxford Union in our forthcoming term. Founded in 1823, the Oxford Union is the largest society at the University of Oxford and one of the most famous student societies in the world. In the past year, we have hosted visits ranging from U.S. Presidents Reagan, Nixon, and Carter to Morgan Freeman and Malcolm X. Moreover, we are famous for debating the most important and pressing issues of the day, from a liberty and security debate last year to the king and country debate of 1933. With a lifetime of fighting for freedom and for African people, you are a globally inspiring champion for racial equality and socialism. Your vision has been crucial to shaping the theory of African internationalism and indeed the socialist movement worldwide. This timely debate would be hugely benefited by your irreplaceable perspective and input." That was the letter they sent to me. And what was interesting, I didn't recognize this until I watched the debate on YouTube, and it was clear that all of the people in the debate was waiting for me to speak. And all of them waiting for what I had to say. And because what we represent was not just some academic discussion. We represent an actual struggle that's happening in the world, a whole movement, revolutionary movement. And first thing I said when I opened up to make clear that we are not, this is not some academic stuff for us, is to extend a salute to Maduro and the people of Venezuela fighting against U.S. imperialism, etc. Yeah. So the party's advanced theory of African internationalism, the fact that our party uses some of the same words as others who claim to be revolutionaries and socialists contributes to the inability of some to distinguish the advanced character of our theoretical works or to recognize African internationalism as a distinct school of revolutionary socialist theory. Many party and Uhuru movement members are neophytes who, due to the counterinsurgency, are only recently entering into a revolutionary political life. Because many are often ill-equipped to understand the leadership provided by our party in the realm of advanced revolutionary theory, I have personally held weekly online political education series every Sunday morning for the past several years. Our party is responsible for the advent of the advanced theory necessary for revolution, African internationalism. The political report to our 6th Congress, published as an uneasy equilibrium quoted earlier, dedicated an entire chapter to the theory of African internationalism, the revolutionary worldview of the African working class. Here's an excerpt, we're quoting. "The science of African internationalism enabled our party to avoid the ideological pitfalls that validate the assumptions of the superiority of white people. Thus, we have never been diverted from our mission of capturing power and uniting Africa and our nation under the leadership of the African working class. Our party brought science to our defeated African liberation movement at a time when it was generally bogged down in racial and cultural nationalism that indulged in candlelit ceremonies, religious obscurantism, and nostalgia for an often imaginary African past. Through African internationalism, we were able to discover the material basis for the exploitation and oppression of Africans and others in the world. With African internationalism, we can understand the material forces at work in the movement of history. We can clearly see the current shift in the balance of power between the oppressor and the oppressed, between Europe and the rest of us, between the so-called white man and the so-called black man. We determined long ago that characterizing our movement as a struggle against racism was a self-defeating waste of time. What is called racism is simply the ideological foundation of capitalist imperialism. Racism is a concept that denies Africans our national identity and dignity rather than defining the system of our oppression. It relegates us to the Sisyphean task of winning acceptance from and often of becoming one with our oppressor. With African internationalism, we have proven that race is simply a colonial invention originating from the enslavement and colonization of Africans and Africa that gave birth to capitalism and simultaneously the European nation. Being the vanguard, unquote, being the vanguard and advanced detachment has meant that we have had to constantly challenge and defeat orthodox, outdated, and hidebound assumptions that function as rigid, fossilized traditions. We continue to quote from an uneasy equilibrium. For us, the rise of capitalism in the world is not based on some purely abstract Marxist theory about the development of human society. It is not a theoretical question. Primitive accumulation is not a theory. The rape of Africa, the enslavement of our continent and our people, the forcible dispersal of Africans throughout the world as a means of rescuing Europe from disease and poverty, the process that gave rise to capitalism, is a matter of historical record. Marx, the spectator, did not have to understand this. The person sitting on the hot stove, the living, breathing, thinking, primitive accumulation, would either understand this question or perish. We chose to understand. More than that, we chose to develop a worldview stemming from this understanding. This is the origin of African internationalism. African internationalism is simply the worldview stemming from an historical materialist investigation and analysis of the world, with its starting point being the experience and role of Africans and Africa in the advent of capitalist imperialism as the rise of white power. Parasitic capitalism is the real issue. It is this reality that ultimately distinguishes African internationalist socialism from the struggle for white rights that usually characterizes most movements of Europeans worldwide. It is the difference in socialism resulting from overturning the pedestal upon which all capitalist activity occurs and some variation of the national socialism achieved by the infamous Nazis of Germany. White people have been mobilized by the inability of capitalism to live up to their expectations. They are demanding to be restored to their rightful place atop the pedestal of capitalist prosperity, sharing in the stolen loot of colonial plunder. The problem is that this can only happen at the expense of the well-being of the historical victims of capitalist prosperity, the subject and colonial peoples of the world whose exploited labor and resources created the pedestal upon which all white people sit. Europe's economic uncertainty has been brought about by oppressed peoples who are currently fomenting the crisis with our struggles for the recapture of our resources, our sovereignty, dignity, and our history. It is an error to assume that primitive accumulation is dead history, something that happened a long time ago with no implications for today. The truth is that today's capitalist imperialist structures, the ones being challenged in 1,000 different ways, are structures that originated in the very genesis of capitalism as it emerged through the assault on Africa and the majority of humanity from the primordial sludge of backward and disease-ridden Europe. These understandings of African internationalism require action. They are not for consumers of information. Our party's theory is the only body of political understanding that can make sense of what is happening in the world today. Our African internationalist theoretical contributions serve to break the shackles historically imposed on revolutionary theory as perceived through the lens of oppressor nation intellectuals whose worldview was determined by the existence on the pedestal of our oppression. African internationalism, for the first time, allows the Africans and the oppressed of the world to become the subjects of history, defining our own destiny, something not possible with the theory of Marx or his contemporaries and followers. Today, the conditions in the real world, manifested in the crisis of imperialism, are beginning to confirm what African internationalism has so long predicted. The reality of primitive accumulation of capital and the fact that capitalism was born at the expense of the suffering of African and indigenous peoples and is therefore parasitic. The reality of Africans as one people dispersed around the world who are colonized wherever we may be located. The understanding that African people live under a policy of U.S. counterinsurgency in the U.S. These are some African internationalists' understanding whose significance is becoming recognized by the world. African people, like all of humanity, have always been motivated by the struggle to understand our place and destiny in the world. We, like others, have through our collective life experiences been compelled to find answers to the fundamental philosophical questions revolving around the primacy of the spiritual versus the material world. What is the basis of our oppression? Can the answer be found in religious scripture? Are we, Sister Betty got an answer to that. Are we oppressed because we have offended the gods or perhaps sought solace from the wrong gods? Are the white colonial oppressors and some of the African petty bourgeoisie correct when they say we are experiencing the consequences of insufficient civilization or inadequate education, or that we are morally depraved? Those who see the spiritual as primary are philosophical idealists. For them, the idea of reality is greater than reality itself. For idealists, the real material world is dependent on the spiritual. Philosophical idealists do not look for answers about the nature of the world by examining the world itself. They see the world as the creation of an external force that is incapable of standing up to scientific investigation. This is a ruling class worldview that is funneled into the consciousness of the working class through African petty bourgeois as well as other petty bourgeois and bourgeoisie mediums. Philosophical idealism assumes that there are things that humans are unable to comprehend. It claims that the hand of the mysterious is somehow responsible for what we perceive as reality. During the historical period when our party was founded, philosophical idealism was central to the worldview of the Black liberation movement, which relied mainly on religious, moral, and colonial explanations to understand and analyze our situation. The African People's Socialist Party sprang from the very bowels of the remorseless reality and struggles of our people. As we developed, we were increasingly forced to shed our reliance on religion, other forms of superstition, and the goodwill or moral epiphany of our oppressors. Our struggles to understand our reality, while occasionally encumbered and influenced by the worldview of the educated and upper classes, were rooted in attempts to solve the real problems of the concrete contradictions in which our people are embroiled. We were forced to learn that our preconceived notions gleaned through colonial civics books, preachers, and liberal white friends only help to obscure the real contradiction with which our people are confronted. We came to recognize that we must understand the world just as it is, not as we would wish it to be. We were forced to become philosophical materialists. Materialism teaches us that the world is tangible, knowable, and can be experienced through the senses. We can understand the world. This is extremely important. You know, this is the party of the African working class. It's critical for us to understand that there ain't nothing that we cannot understand. There's no mysterious hands directing what's happening in the world. And if there are mysterious hands directing what's happening in the world, we need to chop them off. Because what's happening in the world do not help us at all. Yeah. Materialism teaches us that the world is tangible, knowable, and can be experienced through the senses. If you can't see it, taste it, smell it, feel it, and what have you, hear it, it ain't real. It teaches us that all existing phenomena result from material causes that come into being, develop, and pass away according to the laws of the motion of matter. And Sister Aisha, Dr. Aisha, who's a physicist, would tell you that is what we're talking about, physics. Materialism informs us that the material world is primary. It is objective reality that exists independently of the minds and will of individuals. It does not require the permission of gods or important persons for its existence. The development of the African People's Socialist Party during our historical 41-year trajectory, that was when this was written, in the midst of intense struggle compelled us to understand that the savage and genocidal brutality inflicted upon our people and the world by Europeans or whites has a material basis. It is not due to the will of the gods or simply some moral deficiency on the part of whites. Our party and movement were forced to conclude that all humans, including Europeans, are trapped by an absolute necessity to secure and develop the means of subsistence. In other words, the primary motivating factor in human society is the production and reproduction of life. Without life, all other questions, religion, culture, genetics, etc., are moot, meaningless. Indeed, culture is a byproduct of the process of producing and reproducing life. However, the process of Africans producing and reproducing life was drastically disrupted and altered by the European attack that resulted in the capture and colonial enslavement of Africa and Africans. This attack by Europeans on Africa also resulted in the imposition of artificial borders that separate the dispersed African nation from our human and material resources and from a meaningful relationship among ourselves and with the peoples of the world. The material and human resources of Africa have gone to satisfy the requirements of life for Europeans at the expense of Africa and Africans. The process of Africans producing and reproducing life has not been primarily for Africa and Africans. It has been primarily for Europe and the white world at our expense. This progenitor of world capitalism, the attack on Africa and Africans, along with the European assault on Asia and the Americas, rescued Europe and Europeans from an oppressive 1,000-year-long disease-ridden, impoverished existence known as feudalism. This was the genesis of the capitalist system as a world economy, created on a base of the enslavement of Africans and others. A scientific analysis of human society requires that we take a dialectical approach. We cannot see the world as static and ready-made. Society has to be analyzed as a process that is in a constant state of motion, change, and development. There is always something new arising to replace the old, and all social motion occurs in relationship to this process of coming into existence and dying away. You understand that? You got it. You understand that? You understand that even though the U.S. may look strong and powerful at some given moment in history, that it is in the process of dying away. If you understand the signs of that, you can mark it. You can't be scared because you see them acting a certain way. They're acting in desperation. And you know they're desperate because you see what's happening in the world, because you know what their life depends on, this parasitic relationship to the rest of the world. Trump is an expression of this desperation of imperialism. Brexit is an expression of the desperation of imperialism. They're in trouble. They're in crisis, and so they're doing things that forces in crisis do. Europe's attack on Africa was effectively an assault on Africa's ability to produce life for itself. This assault had the effect of pushing Africa and Africans out of history. History being the summation of the ongoing struggle to produce and reproduce life. Slavery, genocide, and colonialism are the stuff of which capitalism was born. African enslavement was first capital in the development of capitalism. The prevailing legal system, culture, religion, and general philosophical outlook or worldview constitute the superstructure of capitalism thus conceived. This superstructure is a natural product and reflection of the economic base of colonial society. Understand, society comprised of an economic base and then a superstructure that responds to the economic base. So that's why, people are talking about fighting against racism. Racism is a concept, an idea, as something that responds to the fact that the economic base is based on slavery and colonialism. That's what it responds to. White people act and say a certain thing because of the economic base that is parasitic. And white people, white society, colonial society live as parasites on the rest of humanity. That's just an objective truth. I'm not saying bad things about white people to make them feel bad. Objectively, that's the relationship that we have. That's the struggle that we're involved in, and white people have to be able to come to understand. That's the basis for the existence of the African Solidarity Committee as well, and the Hutu Solidarity Movement. So, slavery, genocide, and colonialism are the stuff of which capitalism was born. African enslavement was first capital in the development of capitalism. The prevailing legal system, culture, religion, and general philosophical outlook or worldview constitute the superstructure of capitalism thus conceived. This superstructure is a natural product and reflection of this economic base of colonial slavery. Slavery and colonialism gave rise not only to capitalism, but also to the capitalist and working class alike of Europe and North America. The workers and the bourgeoisie, the two primary capitalist defining classes, have occasionally fought great battles with each other since their inception as contending social forces. Nevertheless, both were born and developed on a platform of slavery and colonialism. Consequently, what is often called class struggle inside the U.S. and Europe is actually contention among the workers and the ruling class for control of the parasitic capitalist pedestal and its stolen resources. I'm going to read that again because y'all was sleeping. I don't blame you. If I had to sit and listen to me read like this, I'd be sleeping too. So we say that consequently, what is often called class struggle inside the U.S. and Europe is actually contention among the workers, white workers, and the white ruling class for control of the parasitic capitalist pedestal and its stolen resources. That's the so-called class struggle they're engaged in. The parasitic foundation of world capitalism continues to exist up to now as the true economic base upon which the entire superstructure of the capitalist-defined, capitalist-dominated world rests. The total existence of white people and their ability to produce and reproduce life is dependent on this parasitic relationship that came into being with the attack by feudal Europe on Africa and the world. Instead of separate, more or less self-contained worlds existing in casual relationship to each other, there is one capitalist world system united by a parasitic economic relationship imposed by Europe upon the rest of us. There is therefore no European reality separate from that of Africa and the rest of the world. The entire world is now locked into a single dialectical process, a unity of opposites, whereupon the gruesome extraction of life and resources from Africa and the rest of the world is a condition for the life and development of what we now know as Europe, white people, and the capitalist system to which we have been forcibly affixed. The legal system, culture, white sense of sameness, and political institutions are reflections of this parasitic economic base. You know what I mean? Sense of sameness. There is a white sense of sameness that is enjoyed by people, whether they call themselves French, Germans, Portuguese, Americans, whatever. There is a white sense of sameness, and it has its origin in slavery and colonialism. It's the process that consolidated that. Every white aspiration and dream, every expectation for happiness and a good life, from a successful marriage to a secure future for their children, requires drone strikes in Pakistan, police murders and mass imprisonment in the African colonies and barrios of the U.S., and starvation and forced displacement of the oppressed throughout the world, unquote. I'm not saying that white people wake up and saying, let's go do some drones, but you can't. Every time there's an upset, there's this whole struggle about resources where we ain't, that happens all the time. People see white people struggling. Wow, look at the white people struggling. Yeah, the white people are struggling. They're struggling because the bourgeoisie, the system, cannot provide for them at this moment of crisis what it typically provides for them. People say, fascism is coming. Why is fascism coming? Fascism is coming because something bad seems to be happening in the world. Something bad happening to black people all the damn time. Before Mussolini, before Hitler, before anything called fascism. And when they start screaming about fascism, what they are screaming about is that the dictatorship of pure white power is revealing itself to white people. Usually they refer to it as the hidden dictatorship because they can vote, they can do other kind of stuff that Africans can't. Dictatorship, we see it all the time. Dictatorship all the time. So the cop comes up and says, give me the corner. To you ain't got no freedom of assembly. Black people ain't got no freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of nothing. Never have, not here, not any place in the world. And yet, fascism only happens when something seems to be likely to happen to white people. You must be out of your mind. And what they mean is because this fascism is coming, something bad is going to happen to us. Now, everybody's got to drop what you're doing and then support the Democratic Party. or some other kind of organization that's supposed to be opposed to fascism. Up yours. No, what you'll get off, no, they're going to have to get off their lily white asses and join the anti-colonial struggles of the Africans and oppressed peoples of the world. Amilcar Cabral, who was a leader of the struggle in Guinea-Bissau against Portuguese. The Portuguese left was always telling him, while he's fighting, that look, unite with the Portuguese fight against fascism, because Portugal lived under fascist dictatorship at the time. He said, that'll end colonialism. Cabral said, I don't know about that. He said, but what I do know is victory of the colonized would definitely result in the destruction of fascism in Portugal. And that's exactly how it happened. That's exactly how it happened. So we say, it is this theoretical understanding that demands putting revolutionary organization infrastructure on the ground that distinguishes the party from every other organization in the world today. And how much time I got? I got 2 minutes? Well, I shall try to expedite this. And then at that time, is there a break or am I finished? Oh, okay. All right. So we talk about the earth-shattering significance of our party, and perhaps I should stop now and then go into that, a minute and 50-some-odd seconds later. Oh, hold on. Oh, hold on.
See, we're working it and going over this one. Get this.
I'm so glad you came. I was so happy when they said you guys were coming.
Uhuru. Uhuru. Let's get a chairman another round of applause for the political report. And I just want to piggyback off of a little bit of what Comrade Luigi Conchasa was saying about meeting, a Marcus Garvey of today. And I just want to appreciate the chairman for advancing, the theory of Garveyism today for us to have something practical and something that we can build on today to liberate us and other oppressed peoples of the world. So I just really want to appreciate the chairman for the beginning part of this political report. And right now we're going to take a 15-minute break, and so we're going to start promptly back at 11:15. So we're asking that everybody be very disciplined about the time and be back in your seats at 11:15 so we can continue on with the political report with the chairman. And we ask that you go check out all of our vendors. Every time you support a party institution, you're contributing to your own liberation. So go check out the vendors, go look at the tables. Of course, go support Zinzale Consignment as Aisha and I are displaying some of our wares. So check out the tables and all of the party institutions today. Uhuru. Uhuru. It is my honor to announce Chairman Amali Yeshatel again to continue reading the political report to the first plenary of the 7th Congress. Uhuru.
Uhuru, comrades. I'd like to begin by recognizing, in particular, the comrades who are doing work in South Africa, occupied Azania. We have incredibly significant work occurring there. We'll say some things about that during this process, but I know that a week following this plenary, they will be using this plenary to conduct one in South Africa, occupied Azania. And so I just want to recognize these comrades. Comrade Tafari, you'll see him via video before this is over. Comrades Asa, comrades Kani, comrade Mao, and just all of the other brothers and sisters who are in occupied Azania, so-called South Africa, who are doing an incredible job of building the party there. Also, brothers and sisters, comrades, we'll be leaving out, this presentation, some things about the work that's been happening in the regions. I feel relatively safe in doing that because we're going to have reports from the various regions anyway. So it makes it, it's not absolutely necessary that I do that in this presentation. I am going to spend a lot of time on the Africa question because I think it's one of the least understood by African people, by our party, and by people in the world. And because, separated by this damn ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the work that's being done by various governments to keep Africans on the continent from being able to connect in person with Africans here and other places makes it extremely important for us to explore and explain this relationship. And we'll say something about that, our plans, what it is that we're going to be doing, and what we're calling on the whole African world to participate in making it happen. But I just want to say that I am going to say some things about it because I think it's crucial to our understanding of every question. If we don't understand the Africa question, we understand nothing. So so I'm on page 19, and under the subhead, Earth-Shattering Significance of Our Party. We have taken the struggle beyond protests and are actually constructing our liberated African economy with institutions that will continue to function after we take state power. And we're not doing what the Panthers used to call a survival program or something like that. And we're not doing the kind of program that the original Nation of Islam, they would set up, like these, they would push for the creation of economic institutions and things like that. The economic institutions that we create are in contention with the economic relationship, which is parasitic, that we have with colonial capitalism. We're not trying to find a place within colonial capitalism for these economic entities to exist. Our objective is to negate their existence with the presence of our own independent capacity, our own independent anti-colonial economy on the road to creating the socialist economy that we have to have. And some people are not able to start from the beginning to get to where you need to go and don't recognize perhaps the significance of everything that we've done, every project, every economic institution that we've created leading toward that, an independent economy of African people. Nobody else in the world is even doing that except the bourgeoisie. And it hasn't been done actually since Garvey did this in the 1920s. It hasn't ever been done. So that's the work that we're involved in when we look at these economic institutions and the economic work. The other thing is that when you see revolutions happen, and generally speaking, it turns out that the capture of state power, as difficult as it may be, has been, in some ways, the easier thing. I mean, the Bolsheviks took state power and had no experience in running a damn economy. And we tell the story about how when Lenin in 1917, when they accomplished the revolution, and they weren't quite sure whether they had actually consolidated, and they're sitting in this headquarters where the government was to be located, and they all got on their overcoats and they're sitting on their suitcases because they don't know whether or not the army is going to come in or some force and get rid of them. But none of them had any experience in banking. They didn't know anything about banking. So they sent somebody over to the banks to get some money to run the government. The bank said, "The hell with you, we ain't giving you nothing." I mean, so that Lenin had to actually organize forces to go and rob the bank to run the government after the revolution. They had no experience in running it. And similarly, you see Che Guevara, who was an extraordinary guerrilla, ends up having to play, something like a treasurer, something to that effect, over economics after the Cuban Revolution. Well, we are practicing right now governing. And we are creating banks, and we are creating the institutions, and the working class is learning how to do this. And some people are confused by this because they say, well, you're creating these institutions, therefore you must be capitalist. And these are some weird people who make the assumption that you don't have an economy after you defeat the capitalists. Economic life is an absolute necessity for life itself. So we are in the process of doing that now. And what you see now is a part of the process of destroying our relationship to their economy and creating our own. It negates their economy. So the fight against capitalism doesn't mean that we're fighting against our own economic capacity. We're fighting against their economic capacity in our lives. And part of what helps us to do that are the more than 50 institutions that we've already created in the African People's Socialist Party, and the many more that we are creating moving forward. So it became clear to me half a century ago that the era of protest politics was over, that our people had to really fight for power. We had to have a political party, the most effective vehicle for capturing and wielding political power. Black power had to be translated as our own black state power. This is what separated us from the pack. We're not just running a store or a flea market. We are on a trajectory to seize political power and to overturn the colonizer. Our objective is to liberate Africa and African people, to produce and reproduce real life for African people. The people working in our more than 50 economic institutions are part of something much bigger than the running of the store. They must see the greater picture. Our party is saying no to the imposed colonial economy while replacing this economy with a liberated anti-colonial working class economy. Socialism is the working class becoming the ruling class. Socialism is the socialized ownership of the means of production in the hands of the working class. That's what socialism is. That's what we are constructing. And people who are fighting us are fighting against the ability of the working class to achieve power over our economic life. The ever-developing theory of African internationalism informs the struggle for the liberation of Africa and African people, and hence the global struggle for communism, a scientific ideological expression for the very first time in history. The vanguard status of our party can be found in part by our party's satisfying at least two requirements of revolution: a revolutionary party and advanced revolutionary theory. Elements of the party's theory are to be found ensconced in the utterings of some other African movements, many of which are locked in single-issue work, lifestyle politics, or small circle adventures. Few African organizations have the experience, maturity, or resources to advance our revolutionary movement to the next critical stage. So they take understandings from us, sometimes very much out of context. And while many members of the party find themselves annoyed by the assertions of such opportunists and revisionists, it is to be expected. This is a consequence of being the vanguard. We will influence and have influenced the entirety of the liberation and communist movement, even those that are in contention with the party of the African working class, as well as sectors of the ruling class itself, as we have seen. This is how it has always been. This is how it will remain until our party clearly assumes unambiguous leadership of the entire revolutionary process. Members of our party and movement must heed the urgent call of this first plenary of our 7th Congress to assert full authority and realize the earth-shaking significance of our party for our revolution by vanguarding up and using theory and uniting theory and practice on every front and every arena and area of our revolution. Passing out 50 flyers on a street corner is not organizing. As quietly as it's kept. And we live in a period today where somebody doing that or going on the internet and getting X numbers of likes is a substitute for real organizing. This plenary taking us from behind that damn computer and putting us in the communities and blocks and streets and cell blocks and university campuses and everywhere we need to be to really organize, to organize. We have to have the ability to say that we're going to have a demonstration and pray that somebody, we need to move from praying that somebody shows up. We need to be able to ask the leader of that community, of that unit, of that region to say how many people are going to show up. And to be able to say it because they got their names written down here, because they've done the work to organize people. That's the struggle that we're making now. That's entirely different from this assumption that just because you got somebody on social media or you pass out some flyers that you are somehow being successful. Organizing is what we have to do moving forward in a way that we haven't done since the 1960s. So, for this plenary, we must do more than just report on the work we have done and what we are planning to do. We are on a mission, as stated in the 7th Congress, to build the worldwide liberated African economy that is the foundation of our victory, national liberation, and self-government. This plenary will have to say what we have done in terms of accomplishing the basic strategy laid out in the political report. This does not just mean reporting on what we have done in terms of our tasks, but a comprehensive approach to where we are going. The reports have to lay out the mandates for how our departments, party, and whole movement must move forward. There was no movement, so we built it. This is a task made easier because we've always recognized the need for unity of theory and practice. We are the party that took the abstraction out of our struggle for national liberation by developing and advancing tactics and strategy for black liberation in the U.S. at a time when there was none. Our work continues to be guided by our tactics and strategy today, more than 50 years later. Other groups now articulate aspects of this strategy to advance their own credibility. A January 1980 issue of the Burning Spear addressed the history of our party as Vanguard nearly 40 years ago. In an article titled APSP Conference Plans Program for New Period, the Burning Spear reveals how we assumed the role of Vanguard even then. And I'm quoting. With the publication of the Tactics and Strategy for Black Liberation pamphlet, the party deepened the theoretical basis for our ideological position and laid out a general method for struggling for black liberation within current U.S. borders, finally bringing science to the black movement and enabling the movement to take a broad, united position on the nature and character of our struggle. The petty bourgeois, the party organized September 4, 1977 demonstration to demand freedom for Desi Woods was a major breakthrough in that a broad representation from the black nationalist movement came together on the same platform for the first time in a decade, causing the chairman to exclaim at the rally, "Finally, the black liberation movement is in the hands of black people once again." The subsequent Desi Woods demonstration in Plains, Georgia, on July 4th, 1978, had the same kind of impact, this time resulting in support from other colonized people. The recent building of the African National Prison Organization was but another example of the party's ongoing efforts to rebuild the black liberation movement, bringing science and a strategy to the movement. Now, clear evidence of a revitalized black movement can be seen. This is 1980. When the party was born, there was no movement, so we built it, the chairman said. When the movement was built, it lacked the practical experiences of struggle, so we taught it. When the movement learned to struggle, it lacked clear ideological analysis, so we provided it. When the movement accepted our ideological analysis, it lacked a strategy for African liberation within the U.S., so we constructed a strategy, unquote. The title of our 2020 plenary is Vanguard Up, the unity of theory and practice. However, it should be clear that the role of the party as the advanced detachment began with our inception as a party, as is demonstrated by the quoted article in the Burning Spear that was produced in January 1980, 2 generations before the convening of our party's plenary in February 2020. The struggle for unity of theory and practice is one we have always pursued. It is a pursuit that has always defined us as the advanced detachment. The first plenary of the party's 7th Congress is occurring nearly a year and a half after our October 2018 Congress. Our work since that Congress can be characterized as generally good, and we have achieved unquestionable successes in many ways that confirm the validity of choosing Vanguard as the title of my political report to the Congress. Our 7th Congress took place from October 6 through 12, 2018, but the work of the Congress began much earlier with the creation of the Congressional Committee comprised of the entire Central Committee. The pre-Congress work included the 4-month-long party discussion of the political report, the main resolution of the Congress. Even our Congress is a Vanguard initiative, as there is no other revolutionary African political party in the U.S. and few in the world that open up their organizational process to facilitate the full democratic participation of their membership in charting their course and determining their leadership. Members of our party clearly experience deep personal and subjective feelings for each other, but such personal or subjective feelings are not the basis for our relationship. We are the Vanguard, the advanced detachment, and our subjective and personal feelings for each other are based on our collective unwavering commitment to African internationalism and the total liberation and unification of our Africa and African people globally. This is the basis for our recognition that the unity of our party, the only hope for the liberation of our people, the emancipation of all oppressed and workers of the world, is sacred. Many non-African internationalists are intoxicated by the Jerry Springer, Donald Trump type reality shows that are bourgeois diversions that serve to distract the people from the profound contradictions confronting the African nation and working class. These shows are tools used to dumb down the colonized nation and working class in particular. As the advanced detachment, we have accepted as our responsibility the task to help the oppressed repossess their brains from the clutches of our oppressors by exposing the political contradictions that continue to keep us enslaved. Most of our 7th Congress activities occurred at the Aquaba Hall at our Uhuru House, and that is a true expression of our Vanguard status. It was held barely 6 months after the Uhuru House, led by Comrade Deputy Chair Onazine Ishatella, was transformed from a dilapidated building and eyesore to the headquarters of the party and Uhuru movement in North St. Louis, the seat of the Midwest region. The base for the Black Power blueprint that has become the most outstanding element of our practical program and the prototype for dual power is located here. It is a practical expression of our anti-colonial struggle for political independence, self-reliance, and self-government. It is a material manifestation of the truth that politics, especially the politic of anti-colonialism, is nothing but concentrated economics. Politics is concentrated economics. Our party had gone to St. Louis in August 2014 following the anti-colonial uprising in the working class community on Canfield Drive in the suburb of Ferguson, responding to the police murder of 18-year-old Mike Brown. Brown's body was left to rot for 4.5 hours on 100-degree plus asphalt. The African splendidly appropriate response to this grotesque example of colonial terror was to rise up fighting with the chant, "Kill the police." The militant response by the African working class was met by concentrated military violence, the deployment of armed troops, and by the importation of an assortment of opportunists of every age and persuasion. They included the traditional Africans who have been elevated by the colonial capitalist ruling class to leadership positions as spokespersons for our people. The Reverends Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton were high on the list, but so were other younger Africans, new, energetic, and sometimes representative of lifestyle and single-issue popular causes that white liberals, including some characterized as anarchists, socialists, and revolutionaries, championed as substitutes for attack on colonial capitalism. The amount of money pumped into St. Louis Ferguson by the colonial big bourgeoisie was not limited to Democratic Party moneybags billionaire George Soros, and was intended to hijack the struggle of our people that began with the courageous anti-colonial working class uprising on Canfield Drive. The unambiguous slogan of "Kill the police" was overwhelmed by the imposition of opportunist liberal slogans such as "Black Lives Matter" and "Hands Up, Don't Shoot," supposedly implicit in the stance of the unarmed Mac Brown when he was gunned down by the colonial occupying military force known as police in the U.S. Comrade Diop was with me in August 2014 in Ferguson, St. Louis, where we were positioned in this march from the church down West Florissant that was supposed to be a silent march where nobody said anything. And it was extraordinary. And then, we ran into Africans who were literally falling on their knees going, "Hands up, don't shoot." I mean, it was hard to stomach that. In fact, we didn't stomach it too much. And, but that was what they had brought to us. And again, they would say, well, that's what the people said, because Mike Brown had his hands up, etc. I don't give a damn if Jesus said it. It doesn't matter. I mean, we're supposed to provide leadership to the masses of the people, and so if the people say, lay down and get stepped on, that's what you're supposed to do? What kind of leadership is that, right? So, plus, that ain't what the people said, because the reason I went to St. Louis, to Ferguson, is because we read in the newspaper, people were saying, "Kill the police. Kill the police." That was the response that came from Canfield Drive. Before long, the masses of our colonized people were joined in the spontaneous struggle on the ground in St. Louis Ferguson. Sometimes as whole families would be pushed to the sidelines. Some imprisoned and murdered and replaced by professional protesters who enjoyed a status of loyal opposition of the liberal and George Soros type. Some of the protesters parlayed their phony militancy into elected office. We're fighting them in St. Louis right now. Pop-up schools for community organizers with access to abundant resources were established in St. Louis Ferguson, and with assistance from the bourgeois media and opportunists who were often on the payroll of external forces were able to neutralize the people's initiative. The opportunists positioned themselves as experts in holding demonstrations with no demands. With the willing assistance of local domestic military forces, they occasionally blocked select interstates or temporarily disrupted shopping malls, but were unable to answer the question, to what end? What the continued presence of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement in St. Louis, Ferguson, for nearly 6 years up to today, represents our unwavering determination to complete the African Revolution of the 60s. While all the media have left and much of the money of George Soros and others dried up, our party has begun the development of a social movement that has revolutionary potential. It is a social movement that is being created deeply within the colonized sections of the African working class in St. Louis, and that has the advantage of the leadership of the party of the African working class. The African People's Socialist Party, International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, and African National Women's Organization are deeply embedded in St. Louis, as is the most significant project of the African Liberation Movement internationally, Black Power Blueprint, but also the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement are also deeply embedded in St. Louis. We're fighting on every front it's possible to fight on in St. Louis today. We have been relentless in our struggle and development since our 7th Congress. On October 17, 2018, 5 days after the Congress, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement began our annual Days of Reparation to African People campaign with an event at Aquaba Hall in St. Louis, in the St. Louis Uhuru House. On October 20th, the St. Louis representatives of NPDUM held a well-attended St. Louis community fair in the heart of the African working class colony of North St. Louis. Although not without fits and starts, our mass organizations have shown consistent development in their performance that reflects the improved leadership and a commitment to the emphasized regional strategy that calls for a more stratified leadership on the democratic centralist principles that should grow our party quantitatively and qualitatively. Not only should this strategy allow for bringing in more members to our party, it also spreads the responsibility to regional leaders for establishing the party throughout the regions and building more party organizations. This strategy provides a blueprint for exponential growth of the economic work of the party and reinforcing recognition within our movement of the reality that the political and economics are one. The regional strategy also gives practical meaning to the fact that all politics is concentrated economics. All politics is concentrated economics. That our political expressions of self-determination reflect the anti-colonial struggle for economic self-reliance, which is to liberate the productive forces of the African nation. So the politics, when we start talking about national liberation, self-determination, this is a struggle for liberating the productive forces of the African nation. All politics is concentrated economics. And the politics of liberation is about the economics of self-reliance. This builds the consciousness and organization within the party and among the colonized masses to participate in building and protecting our party, movement, community, base, and economic institutions. The institutions can't survive if they're not protected by the masses of the people. The people have to become a part of this process in the deepest profound way. And we see that happening in St. Louis, I should say, by the way. Well, even, sisters who are streetwalkers who make their living on the streets have come up and say, we know who you are. Yeah. And how proud and happy that they are that we are there. And the support is deep and made manifest in so many different ways in St. Louis. Then the institutions are seen as their institution. That 50-foot flagpole with that 15 by 25-foot flag, red, black, and green flying over, that was the beginning of actually challenging the consciousness of the people. People, Africans, would pass by, would stop and park in the middle of the street and get out and take pictures. School buses would come by and the children would take pictures and things like that. That was part of the beginning. And if you see it now, where we've taken it from that time even to now, it is remarkable. And the institutions have to be something that belong to the people. The people must understand the significance of these institutions. They won't survive otherwise. It must be necessary, if the United States government attacks these institutions, they must be prepared to engage in guerrilla warfare with the masses of the people who see these institutions as their institutions and responsible for our ability to survive, live, and prosper. It is clear that the leaders of our mass organizations are growing in political maturity, experience, and confidence. Certainly this is exemplified by the work of NPDUM, NWO, and APDEP. Although with APDEP it is currently reflected primarily in the development of Zenzele, the organization's main economic institution that is also proving to be an important political organizational tool. The office of the Deputy Chairwoman, Onozine Ishitela, is renowned within our party and movement for her careful and dedicated attention to the mandates and protocols assigned to her office by every Congress and plenary political report. She has consistently brought these mandates to life through quick and creative implementation involving the party, her office, the movement, and the surrounding African working class community. The Deputy Chairwoman also either wrote or presided over the writing of many of the how-to manuals and plans of action the party has produced for several years of several areas of the work. More than anyone else, Deputy Chair Onozine is a stickler for utilization of our manuals, often declaring that it is unnecessary to reinvent the wheel. This creates an easily accessible bank of training within our party and movement. It helps to professionalize and standardize our work in all our more than 50 institutions and the various political committees of the party and our movement. Come here, child, like you got skinny, man. The utilization of our manuals and fidelity to our protocols give us constant access to the 50-year plus experience and memory of our party, something that cannot be found anyplace else. But what must also be understood is that the Deputy Chair does not simply use the protocols and manuals of the party, as important as that is. On any given day, the Deputy Chair's office, any given day, a visit to the Deputy Chair's office will find her poring over the political report of our most recent Congress, just as she will with the political report to this plenary. Understanding the political report is what helps her to know the significance of particular protocols. It informs her of the importance of existing manuals or the need for more manuals. It is unity with the political report and the internalization of key understandings such as the political and economic of one that inspire the creativity and ingenuity that is the hallmark of her work. The political report prodded the Deputy Chair to advance the work for African self-reliance. And while there were some directives of what should be done, there was nothing that told her to build the Black Power, Buy Black Power program that she has initiated. Likewise, the African National Independent Business Association, ANIBA, was her brainchild. It was inspired by the political report that spelled out our Congress's 5-year program and general mission for this period. She also trained and worked closely with every department and organization of the party, empowering each entity to build economic self-reliance institutions of their own. This has transformed all our work and has made it clear on every front that our party has gone far beyond mere protest and is distinguished by self-reliance and self-government. There is no front of the work of the party that does not bear the handprint of the office of the Deputy Chair. Her heavily lined, well-read, frequently referenced political report is what guides her work. The Party Congress, that is the source of so many of our protocols, mandates, and resolutions based on thorough African internationalist political summation relevant to this period. The internalization of the political report galvanizes the office of the Deputy Chair as the most consistent, well-organized department of our party. It is one to be emulated. Every party leader and member would do well to follow this example. This plenary will update our work where necessary, and we are raising the 7th Congress resolution regarding implementation of the party's regional strategy to the highest priority. This includes emphasis on local and unit organizational building and consolidation. At the end of this document, we will lay out mandates for each party member and organization to implement this year. However, the office of Deputy Chair must continue the trajectory of building her office and developing the programs and strategy that was begun during the pre-Congress process and carried out since the 7th Congress. Mandates for the office of the Deputy Chair include the work to forward the economic development work in Africa, especially in occupied Tanzania, South Africa, where our organizational strength appears optimal. Our party and movement there are working on economic development plans of action that must be reviewed for possible inclusion in a comprehensive international African economic project. The office of the Deputy Chair must also prepare for the plan for massifying the economic work among the whole party, movement, and African population at large. All our party members must become individual advocates and stakeholders for the development of our 50-plus self-reliance programs. In every aspect of our work among the African masses, party members must win Africans to take part in the struggle for African self-reliance by supporting our programs and institutions with financial contributions. Party regions must begin the process of winning all our mass committees and local party organizations to train and instruct all our members to win on-the-spot donations from all the people we encounter during our political work, especially Africans. This is one of the most important methods for explaining the programs for self-reliance to our people, allowing them to become willing accomplices in this aspect of our liberation and winning even more respect from the people because of this economic work. The office must establish the infrastructure, collection, and accounting process for all the protocols to carry out this mandate, and that can be as important as any of our other economic programs because of its inclusion of individual party members who are not necessarily assigned to our economic institutions. This program allows the African masses to become a fundamental part of our economic development, whether they are located in an area of one of our institutions or not. Advanced detachment and regional strategy. The African People's Socialist Party has been in an important stage of growth and development since our historic 7th Congress that designated our party as the vanguard and advanced detachment of the African Revolution. Now, nearly a year and a half after the 7th Congress, we are facing a critical turning point. For our party to continue to move forward, we must put the regional strategy on the ground with the greatest urgency everywhere we are located. To fail to do this, to fail to do so threatens to stagnate the party, preventing it from moving to the next plateau in our revolutionary progress. Such a failure would be a tremendous setback. This is why we must vanguard up and put solid organization on the ground in every region. Starting on page 183 of the book Vanguard, the 7th Congress Political Report, we laid out the party's vision of the regional strategy. I'm going to quote, "Our struggle against colonial capitalism must be rooted in the actual colonized territories that we occupy. This is the essence of dual and contending power. There is no such thing as revolution that does not occupy territory. It's just something in your brain. Something in your brain. Occupying territory is critical, political, ideologically, organizationally, what have you. We have to occupy our territory, and that's something that we need to become extraordinarily clear about. And even the most apolitical street organizations called gangs understand the question of occupying territory. You gotta occupy and control territory. So we say again, our struggle against colonial capitalism must be rooted in the actual colonized territories that we occupy. This is the essence of dual and contending power. The victory of our party will come as a consequence of our success in transforming every colonized African community into a conscious, active opponent of colonialism. Transforming every colonized African community into a conscious, active opponent of colonialism. That's our job. We will take organization and ideological development to the heart of the African working class communities where the colonial contradictions are concentrated. The reality of our theory of dual power will be made more obvious in this regional strategy that we will implement coming out of our 7th Congress. In the political report to the party's 2017 plenary, we began the discussion of the need for our regional work to function properly as a critical vehicle for the development of the party and implementation of our political agenda. The regional structures must create organizational hubs from which party growth and organization radiates. The various regional committees provide the infrastructure for building and leading the party all over the world. Regional leadership assumes the responsibility for spreading the party ideologically, making African internationalism the guiding worldview of the African masses within the region. The regional leadership puts the party on the ground in the various neo-colonial state territories and spreads the party and our organizations throughout every village, city, and province. Henceforth, every region must be recognized as a political economic hub of the party. Our regional political work must be forwarded as a manifestation of the economic trajectory of our party towards self-determination. In other words, our political work is the anti-colonial representation of the struggle against economic dependency, the essential component of colonialism. These regional political economic hubs must inform our recruitment and membership drives and party assignments. Our basic recruitment targets remain the same as laid out in the political report to the last 2 Congresses. African women, labor, students, and prisoners. We must now be conscious of a real need to recruit and assign forces within the regions to facilitate the economic development, political promotion, and protection of the institutions of our party and movement. You know, this building that we are in right now was attacked by the United States government in form of police departments from throughout this area, highway patrol, and then the National Guards were set up at this stadium just a few blocks from here. And they attacked this building with the intent of killing me and various other leaders of this party. They came in helicopters and airplanes, and more than 300 troops attacked us. And they tried to set the building on fire by shooting tear gas canisters that would set trees aflame around us and shot them on the top of the building. But what prevented them from being successful is that the masses rose up. And for one thing, they made the mistake of not, they made the mistake of when they attacked this building of not allowing some of the members of the party and the movement to get back into the building because they would shoot pepper spray at them. So what happened was it got heated, and the people brought a helicopter down right out here, you know, as a part of this, you know, of our response. And the people are critical, and that's the thing that, you know, the point that I really want to make. The people are critical, you know, in this struggle. The newspaper, the local newspaper, they call themselves the Times. We call them the Slimes. They quoted a radio transmission from the cop who was leading this thing, and they quoted him as saying, "Pull the troops back. We're under heavy fire." And they pulled them back. But their intent was to wipe us out. And the people are the critical elements in anything that we're talking about doing, the people. So the economic component of the regional hubs of the party, operating under the leadership of the Deputy Chair, Onozene Ishitelu, whose office is responsible for all our economic work, would have the responsibility for building the party's regional economic presence. Each of the party's regions must become custodians of the economic strategy of the party for advancing the critical component of the anti-colonial struggle for self-reliance. Each of the regions would have the assignments to building the party's economic work within its designated area of responsibility. in addition to the political work implicit in their presence. All our Uhuru houses must become economic outlets for all the products from our related enterprises, unquote. Comrades, this is a magnificent vision, a roadmap for transformation that will build our party by leaps and bounds. It is up to us to make this vision a reality everywhere we are located. Centering the party's strategic growth and development within the regions and demanding real regional leadership and committees was a significant clarification on the party's organizational strategy. It is through these regions that we can now demand genuine actual leadership from throughout the party's structures. The regional representatives are responsible for organizing and leading regional committees that have organizational responsibilities throughout the territories comprising city, state, and territory in the region through the creation of local party organizations and Uhuru movement groups that, among other things, will establish local neighborhood offices of our movement. This is an organizational strategy that demands leadership from increasingly large numbers of party and Uhuru movement organizations and individuals. This is the means by which we measure the value of members and cadre by what they attempt and accomplish in carrying out the mission inherent in the regional strategy. Party leadership loses all abstraction and becomes quantifiable. This is what contributes to the dynamism of our party and movement. Leaders must lead, and the regional strategy provides the organizational logic for the expression of diverse and responsible leadership in every arena of our organization. This is the method through which we will recruit more and more members and transform them into cadre and leaders. The regional strategy is key to the recruitment of new forces directly into the party, or as components of our pool of reserve forces that can be brought into the party of other party organizations as required. This puts a fundamental responsibility for recruitment directly in the hands of local party and movement organizations and organizers. This will be unnerving for some party and movement leaders and members. In the past, we have recruited too many people who were later deemed unready or not party material, and we don't want to choke the party with such forces. And that's just one statement of some of the people we recruited into the party that proved to be problematic as hell. You understand? Others were, I don't know how to put that on paper. So I understand why some people are reluctant to move in this fashion, but however, we have to remove the unnecessary bureaucratic barriers that prevent entry into the party to people who do not meet purely subjective criteria beyond what is called for by our Constitution. We cannot require potential recruits to be African internationalists before we have brought them into our midst and taught them through theory and practice how to become African internationalists. Throughout our regional structure, the regional committees, local and mass organizations, etc., we must be capable of recruiting into our party and organizations. This first plenary of our 7th Congress must initiate the training process necessary to expedite recruitment that does not bow to organizational opportunism, the practice of simply bringing in members to pad our membership numbers. The regional strategy will facilitate our ability to recruit more efficiently and from people with whom we are more likely to be familiar. Such recruitment will help to fill out our party structure with people where they are located and enhance our likelihood of bringing in people where they are most needed and in areas most consistent with their actual abilities. People recruited into our communities can be given leadership responsibilities in their communities. Likewise, people recruited into citywide organizations can be given responsibility that are consistent with their base of party activity. A block or community leader will be competent to lead within that block or community, and local party leaders will seldom, except for extraordinary circumstances or a demonstration of extraordinary skills, be given responsibility for leading a state or region except as a deserved promotion. This strategy highlights the serious role that political education has to play throughout the party structures. The regional representatives and committees must mandate regular political education schedules for all members, and special new member schools must be frequently organized locally to deepen the political education and training of new members who have not had the benefit of our party-intensive education process. Requiring regular political education throughout the party structure is another means of transferring leadership responsibility throughout the party and lessening the reliance on party leadership from afar. This is one of the methods of allowing for the dynamic development of our party and all party members through utilization of the regional strategy. Every level of party organization, from the central committee to the basic party cell, will be responsible for pushing and making accountable the educational development of all our members all the time. Ongoing political education is a crucial component of party life. The appropriate use of sponsors who train and advise new members can allow for more recruitments to come in and actively participate in the work with limited potential for disruption. Any disruption from a disunited recruit will be contained to the region, city, community, or special area of political work they are assigned to. Our party has made a major accomplishment in establishing the regional strategy at our 7th Congress. We have reduced the number of regions included in our structure in the U.S. And elected regional representatives for each of them. However, we are continuing to grapple with having the regions function effectively, and our regional representatives have to be one to lead the regions if our strategy is going to realize its potential. Now, I wrote this, maybe, a couple of months ago, but stuff has been developing, and even within the regions, I see movement occurring that was not happening, even as, or effectively, was not obvious and evident as this was being written. The northern region played an important role in organizing successful November 1st through 3rd, 2019 Black is Back coalition rallies, marches, and conference in Washington, D.C. Under the leadership of, and I think this is as far as I'm going to go with this, okay? And then I'm going to move to page, I'm going to move to page 56. Is that right? Yeah, 56. And this is the party in occupied Azania and the ASI. And this is part of the political report I'm most excited about. Azania, of course, is what the thieves call South Africa. And also, I want to tell you now that before getting into this, there's a portion here that I had intended to copy edit out. And it's the and it is the last paragraph. So in occupied Azania, or settler neo-colonial South Africa, the party is active in several provinces, and the Uhuru movement is growing rapidly. The current recruitment strategy being used, and you won't know that by some of the stuff that you see on social media or in the news about what's happening in South Africa. You know why? Same reason you don't know much what the party is doing. Because the party is doing it in the African colonized working class communities. There's no other organization that you can point to anywhere that's developed the kinds of institutions and presence that we have developed throughout this country and various other places. We build concretely on the ground. And so that's distinctly different from organizations that revolve around protests. We protest at the drop of a hat, but the protests are linked to advancing the overall struggle against colonial capitalism, right? And so in occupied Azania, our work is in the townships. In the townships. That's where you know, that's where the center of all the oppression, exploitation of the African working class in these damn townships. And that's where we are. So in occupied Tanzania or settler neo-colonial South Africa, the party is active in several provinces and the Uhuru movement is growing rapidly. The current recruitment strategy being used to bring recruits directly into NPDOM the current recruitment strategy being used is to bring recruits directly into NPDOM, the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, to minimize the previous problems of new party members being unprepared to competently carry out party roles according to party standards. The chair of our South Africa Occupied Tanzania party is Comrade Tafari, a strict African internationalist who is being prepared to take on an even greater area of responsibility for building the party in Africa. The role of South Africa in the struggle to liberate and unify Africa cannot be overstated. The quote-unquote investment the imperialist powers made to fortify its position in Africa through the white settlers consisted of industrial development that they denied much of the rest of Africa. The African internationalist capture of power in South Africa will expedite the transfer of development throughout the continent. Currently, the African People's Socialist Party, I think it was easy for people to recognize South Africa as a settler colony. Rhodesia, settler colony. Some people can even say that with the white nationalist U.S. military outpost called Israel, settler colony. And the reality is the U.S., a settler colony. White people are not indigenous to this damn territory. And so that's what we're looking at, a settler colony. In South Africa, I used to love it because they had a wonderful slogan similar to what we hear in Ferguson, St. Louis. And the slogan in South Africa, it was one that was competed with the one man, one vote slogan that came from the liberals. The slogan was, one settler, one bullet. Can you say that? One settler, one bullet. One settler, one bullet. Settler, settler. Bullet, bullet. Bullet, bullet. Settler, settler. I'm not saying we should say that in the U.S. I'm not saying we should say that in the U.S., but it is a settler colony. So, so currently the African People's Socialist Party, Occupied Tanzania, is planning to initiate the regional hub economic strategy with a number of plans on the drawing board. Hopefully, with the support of Comrade Deputy Chair Ona Zane Shatella and her office, we will soon be able to begin production. I'm turning to page 57. The African Socialist International is a concrete, practical expression of African internationalism. It is the practical method through which the forcibly dispersed African nation, under the leadership of the advanced detachment, its general staff, assumes authority over the future of Africa and our people. The ASI is the organization of all party organizations everywhere. It is the means by which we establish a unified organization of professional revolutionaries committed to the liberation and unification of Africa everywhere Africans are located on the planet Earth. None of us has to ever fight for our liberation alone, in isolation from each other. We can unite our struggle and share lessons and experiences in fighting an imperialist enemy that is united in our exploitation. Imperialism has amassed a bounty of shared experiences in colonial domination that fills libraries of prestigious universities. The African Socialist International is the practical organizational instrument for the liberation and unification of Africa. We have to remember that every party unit everywhere, anywhere in the world, including inside the U.S., is an active part of the African Socialist International. The ASI is the concretization of our theory of one Africa, one nation. The African Socialist International is involved in the dynamic process of actualizing the African nation. We can define the African nation because we are practically involved in consolidating it. The African nation is a revolutionary proletarian nation that will be consolidated as part of the process of overturning direct and indirect, brutish, neo-colonial political domination and vicious, life-limiting economic exploitation. It is our actual functioning organizational presence throughout the African world that gives life to the neo-colonial inventions that are characterized as nations. The African continent was balkanized and refashioned by European imperialists in Berlin, Germany in 1884 and 85. The result of the distribution of the partitioned Africa among themselves are the false European contrived countries that are also commonly and incorrectly called nations. Like gods, the Europeans first invented themselves as nations, and then invented their not so immaculate African conceptions as their imperfect, distorted reflection. We, African internationalists, are the only ones who can fight for the total liberation of all Africa and all African people. We reject the self-serving European definition of the nation that was itself a product of the advent of capitalism united at the expense of the national consolidation of Africans and many others. The definition of the nation that we accept as one determined to solve the problems associated with the development of Africa and our people. It is a definition that calls for the consolidation of the African nation as a process of development which can only occur through negation of the colonial capitalist system. We reject the false European-created borders, wherein the definition of the African nation is contained. We reject this in Africa, Europe, and the U.S., Asia, or the various territories within the Americas that came as a result of stolen indigenous land and African colonial slavery. These are imperialist-serving definitions that lock Africa and the world in a permanent state of parasitic economic exploitation and political servitude. Ghana cannot fight for the total liberation and unification of Africa and our globally dispersed African nation. Neither can Somalia or South Africa or Jamaica or Black Britain. At best, they can only fight for their own limited freedom and sovereignty as defined by imperialist determined assumptions of nationality. At best, we can only fight for the colonizer's definition of our freedom within the colonizer's constructed reality. As African internationalists, we do not respect the borders created by our oppressors for the purpose of dividing us and our Africa to facilitate the theft of our resources. We are Africans, and Africa is ours. Africa for Africans at home and abroad, the slogan demand advanced by Marcus Garvey more than 100 years ago, resonates today even with greater alacrity among African internationalists, 21st century Garveyites. We fight for Africa wherever we are, whether on the African continent, in Amsterdam, or Mississippi, USA. This is the practical application of African internationalism. African nationality is made real because African internationalists make it real. Whatever lesser identities we have as a people, our primary guiding identity is African. All people have more than one definition, you see. You know, sometimes they're Catholics and Protestants and they are Yoruba and a whole bunch of other things, but our primary guiding definition, Africans. The African nation is where we are, and we are everywhere. African internationalists recognize our responsibility to define ourselves as part of the struggle for our liberation. The imperialists, the white colonial capitalists claim their own national identity, and in the process of defining themselves, they define Africans as a necessary antipode to give their self-identity validity. Because in the final analysis, if we are Africans, then who the hell are they? Every white person in this country has to answer that question. African internationalism tells us that we have the responsibility to define ourselves as part of the struggle for our liberation. Our identity is made real by us and the African Socialist International. The ASI deploys the advanced detachment, the vanguard of African liberation and the African working class throughout the African world, on and off continental Africa, The African Socialist International is the practical political instrument for establishing the African nation wherever we are. We are not some imperialist defined creation. We are not hyphenated white people. We are not a portion of the territorial U.S. South. We are not people of color. We are Africans, and we are Africa. Is we lay to Africa. Last year, the leaders of our party in neo-colonial South Africa, I want to just say this quickly. Somebody say I only got a couple of minutes left. Is this just a breakthrough that I'm approaching? Okay, but sometimes, like, I think it was around 1861, there was a white man, because Italy had gone through all these struggles. Well, it's not Italy. It was consolidated sometime around that time frame. This guy is, I can't think of his name right now, Desaguliers. It's called Desaguliers because he comes from a place called Aglio, something like that, and he was from that place, so Desaguliers. Through this struggle of working to consolidate what is now called Italy, although it ain't that consolidated, to tell you the truth right now, he made the statement. He's called often the father of the Italian nation. He said, we have created Italy, we have made Italy, now we must make Italians. And a point is that white people define who the nations are and themselves as nations. Everybody does that. And so here we are becoming these creatures that have been created by white power, by imperialism and what have you, and not having the confidence to define ourselves. African Socialist International will do that in a practical way. It ain't question. It's not a question of whether we are a nation or not. It is a reality, and part of the way we know it's a reality, because I'm going to read on page 59, it says, we are Africans because we say we are. That's the subtitle. And early last year, the leaders of our party in neo-colonial South Africa, or occupied Azania, addressed this understanding in their plan of action for advancing our party work. It is a clear demonstration of the nation-building project when under the leadership of African internationalists. From the plan of action, this is from South Africa and probably from Comrade Tafari. Quote, the African Socialist International functions from a standpoint that clarifies science from philosophical idealism, which is a much needed dichotomy to draw up in occupied Azania, because South Africa has removed African people from political life and given our people an ideological basis for faith in imperialism, given Africans in South Africa the impression that other African people outside of this border are different from us. In fact, that Africans in this border are not Africans, but some kind of people gracefully making the white man's burden easier by not being tied to Africa and African people above this false national identity. The importance of studying African internationalism on the continent helped us to see that it is not important to Africanize the countries like the Pan-Africanists suggest, that it's not worth the effort to be some kind of Azanian instead of South Africans. This happened in Rhodesia. It's now Zimbabwe. But the African working class still lives in Rhodesia. You understand? He said, this happened in Rhodesia that's now called Zimbabwe, but the African working class still lives in Rhodesia. The conditions never changed, just the name. So African internationalism has designated the borders we are in as an impediment to African unity and development under the leadership of the working class, thus prompting us to see that the real South Africans are really the ones who stole our land and dispersed our people through slavery. African internationalism has showed us that Africa is more important than the artificial states built atop our Africa, meaning South Africa is a cancer on the body of Mother Africa. Uhuru. We define, this is unquote, we define the African nation in my political report to our 6th Congress published as an uneasy equilibrium. We made a scientifically based African-serving definition. We concluded that the definition of the nation is not just a purely abstract academic issue. we maintain that our conditions of existence today revolve around this critical question of the African nation and the nation in general. You know, Malcolm was messing with this question too. You know, Malcolm really struggled with this question of the nation, you know, and what it is that we are fighting for. And he defined these nations, and he said what nations were, you know, and what have you. The material conditions, quote, Africans suffer worldwide have their origin in the attack on Africa that led to the capture of our national homeland and our people. Our poverty and its susceptibility to ignorance, violence, and material want throughout the world, including in the U.S., UK, and the rest of Europe, result from the material conditions of existence in Africa since its capture and partition, unquote. We make the further, more important point in this excerpt of what we mean by the African nation, quote, the African nation then is a community of people whose core identity is based on historical ties to the equatorial continent of Black Africa, contributing to a common culture, history, and physiognomy. The African nation is also comprised of all those African people who have been forcibly dispersed to various places in the world through colonial slavery. Dispersed Africans were part of the process of the development of capitalism and the European nation, a process that requires our subjugation and national incoherence. Additionally, the African nation is comprised of many who experience a sense of sameness, a subjective connection to Africa, mainly because of skin color, that helps to define their imperialist-inspired, impoverished, and oppressed state of existence. The Dalit in India, the indigenous of Australia, and other areas where the African presence goes back to earliest times, such as in the Asia-Pacific region, are included in this category, Santosh. Finally, the African nation can include people of other nationalities living in Africa who commit national suicide, becoming part of the African working class and abandoning all allegiance for a predatory colonial relationship to African people. The truth, stated simply, is we are Africans, whatever else we may be called, because we say we are Africans and we feel like we are Africans. Yeah. And yeah. Africa is the national homeland of all Black people worldwide. It is the land to which the identity of the African nation is firmly and irreversibly affixed. Our historical connection to Africa represents the critical element of the material basis for African nationality. For although we have been forcibly dispersed by colonial slavery and related factors subsequent to the initial European attack on Africa, our current conditions of existence, both in Africa and abroad, are essentially defined by the consequences of our forced dispersal. Uhuru. So we're going to take a break now, I think. How many? 15 minutes? Okay. So. Oh, what is that? Has that related to lunch at all? It is related. We're going to keep moving? I don't know how we're moving. Who is it? Somebody's leading us. Where's our leader? You see that sister there? What's that dress pattern? You know that a panther is a leopard. Do you know that? Yeah, you just can't see the spots. Yeah.
Just can't see the
So
spots.
what you want, Panther woman?
Oh, okay, let's give the chairman a round of applause for that incredible political report. Uhuru. One Africa.
One nation.
One Africa.
One nation.
Uhuru. All right, we'll be returning to this, and we'll be adopting the political report later on this afternoon. But before we go to lunch, we're going to take a group photo. So during lunch, let's remember to check out our vendors and support the different institutions of the party. And let's be disciplined and return back from lunch at 12. Oh, I'm sorry, at 1:30. Just kidding, y'all gonna have time to eat, don't worry. And then also, if you can get your printed copy of the party's organizational manuals for $10 at at Agitrop's table. And we're going to have Agitprop lead this group photo, so if everyone could go to the front for our group photo. And make sure you have your lunch ticket. Don't be crying yesterday if you ain't got your lunch ticket.
Where are we? Oh, this is coming down.